The radio crackled with static before dying completely. That was 3 days ago. Now I sit in my ranger cabin, listening to something massive moving outside in the darkness. My name is Mikhail Petrov. I'm a forest ranger with 15 years of experience. What I'm about to tell you happened last week in the Tiger Forest Reserve. It started during my regular night patrol. The temperature had dropped to -10, and fresh snow covered the ground. I was checking the eastern perimeter when my flashlight beam caught something unusual in the snow. I stopped the patrol vehicle and got out to investigate. The tracks were unlike anything I'd seen in my career. They were clearly footprints, but massive, easily 18 inches long. The stride length between them measured over 6 feet. Whatever made them was walking on 2 legs. I took photos and measurements, following standard protocol. The impressions were fresh, maybe an hour old at most. I radioed base station to report the findings. The connection was weak, full of static. I could barely make out their response before the radio went silent. I checked the equipment. Everything seemed fine, but there was just dead air. I decided to continue my patrol and report in person the next morning. The wind picked up as I drove back toward my cabin. Snow started falling heavily. My headlights caught more of those tracks crossing the access road. They were heading in the same direction as my cabin. I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. I reached the cabin at 11:47 p.m. The first thing I noticed was my motion-activated security light hadn't turned on. When I checked, the bulb was intact, but cold. I pulled out my flashlight and swept the beam around the cabin's perimeter. More tracks in the fresh snow. They circled the entire building. Inside, I immediately checked the satellite phone. Dead. The regular landline was also silent. I tried the radio again. Nothing but static. The generator was running fine, but something was interfering with all communications. I double-checked all windows and doors, making sure they were securely locked. At 1:13 a.m., I heard the first sounds. Heavy footsteps in the snow, circling the cabin. The steps were slow, deliberate. Whatever it was huge. I could feel slight vibrations through the floor with each step. I kept all lights off and watched through the windows, but the snow was falling too heavily to see clearly. The walking continued for exactly 17 minutes, then silence. I stayed at the window, scanning with my night vision equipment. Nothing moved in the darkness. The snow kept falling. At 3:24 a.m., something hit the back of the cabin. Not a crash or an accident, it was deliberate. 3 slow, powerful impacts that shook the whole structure. I grabbed my rifle and emergency pack, moving away from the windows. Standard procedure is to stay put and await backup, but backup wasn't coming with communications down. The impact stopped. Then I heard sniffing, loud, powerful inhalations moving along the wall. It was checking every seam of the cabin. The sound moved to the door. I could hear deep, wet breathing on the other side. The door handle rattled. The whole door frame creaked under pressure. I aimed my rifle at the door. The rattling stopped. More footsteps, moving away. Then silence again. I didn't sleep that night. I documented everything in my logbook, took photographs of the tracks, and prepared for evacuation if necessary. Dawn came at 7:19 a.m. The snow had stopped. I did a careful perimeter check. The tracks were everywhere, but different from the night before. These showed claw marks at the tips. Deep gouges marked the walls where something had scraped against the cabin. The door had deep scratches in the metal, and the frame was slightly bent. I attempted all communications again. Still nothing but static. I decided to drive to the main ranger station, 46 kilometers away. The vehicle wouldn't start. When I checked under the hood, I found claw marks on the battery cables. They had been deliberately cut. The second night was worse. It started at sunset, 4:52 p.m. The same heavy footsteps, but now accompanied by vocalizations. They weren't animal sounds. They were almost like words, but distorted, deep, coming from something with the wrong kind of vocal cords trying to speak. I recorded everything on my phone, but the audio files were corrupted when I tried to play them back. The thing spent hours testing the cabin's defenses. It tried every window, every potential entry point. I could hear claws scraping methodically along the walls, the roof. The metal door dented inward from impact after impact, but it never used full force. It was testing, probing, learning. I had 3 emergency flares. I fired one straight up through the chimney opening at 8:13 p.m. The red light illuminated a massive shape moving away from the cabin, at least 8 feet tall, but the details were obscured by the snow that had started falling again. The flare died after 40 seconds. The shape vanished into the darkness. The testing and impacts continued until dawn. I documented 17 distinct vocalizations, 39 impact attempts on the door, and over 100 instances of systematic probing at windows and walls. The temperature dropped to -25. The generator kept running, but all electronics continued to malfunction. The 3rd day, I tried to hike out. I made it exactly 2.7 kilometers before I found the tracks. They formed a perfect circle around the cabin area, extending outward in every direction. I recognized the pattern from my training. It was hunting behavior, establishing territory. I was being confined. I returned to the cabin and took inventory. 3 days of emergency food remained. Half a tank of generator fuel, 2 flares, ammunition for the rifle, no communication, no transportation. And the sun was setting again. The 3rd night was different. No footsteps, no impacts, just that deep, wet breathing, constant, from all around the cabin. For hours, nothing but the sound of breathing. At 2:47 a.m., something heavy landed on the roof. Claws scraped across the metal surface, slowly, deliberately. I could see the ceiling bulge slightly under the weight. The breathing got louder. A deep, resonant sound started, not quite a growl, not quite speech. It went on for 6 minutes. Then silence, complete silence. Even the wind stopped. At 3:33 a.m., the door burst inward. The frame broke completely. Standing in the doorway was a mass of shadow, steam rising from its form in the cold air. I fired 3 rounds. The bullets hit. I heard the impacts. The shape stepped forward. I fired again. It moved with impossible speed. The rifle was ripped away, crushed like paper. I felt hot breath on my face, smelling of blood and decay. A hand bigger than my chest pinned me against the wall. In the dim light, I saw eyes reflecting like mirrors, but wrong. They were too knowing, too aware. The generator died. Total darkness. That deep, wet breathing right in front of my face. The pressure on my chest increased until I couldn't breathe. My ribs creaked. Those reflective eyes moved closer. Then suddenly, pressure released. Sound of movement. Cold wind. When I managed to light an emergency lantern, the cabin was empty. The door lay crumpled on the floor. All my photographs, my logbook, my phone, everything with documentation was gone. Only claw marks in the walls and my broken rifle proved anything had happened. Dawn came at 7:22 a.m. A rescue team found me an hour later, responding to an automated emergency signal from my cabin's backup systems. They documented the damage, the tracks, the claw marks, but the snow started falling again as they worked. Within hours, all physical evidence was buried. I filed my report, included every detail, every timestamp, every measurement. The official investigation blamed storm damage and stress-induced hallucination. They said the claw marks were from a bear, though no bear could reach 9 feet up a wall. They said the footprints were distorted by wind and snow. They transferred me to a new district. But I know what I experienced. I know it was testing me, learning about me. And I know why it let me live. Because now others will only hear this as a story. A tale from a stressed-out ranger who spent too much time alone in the woods. The thing in the forest understands this. It's been doing this for a long time. I've requested a transfer to desert regions. I've sold my camping gear. I don't do night shifts anymore. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I catch a whiff of that smell, blood and decay. And I know it's still out there, testing cabins, learning patterns, selecting its moments. The official file on the incident is 3 pages long. My personal log, before it was taken, was 78 pages. I wrote this account to preserve what really happened. The timestamps, measurements and locations are exact. I memorized everything before my log disappeared. This isn't a story meant to frighten. It's a warning, documented as precisely as I can make it. If you're ever in the deep forest and your radio starts failing, if you find tracks too big to be natural, if you hear breathing that sounds almost like words, don't wait. Don't investigate. Don't try to document. Just run. Run while it's still testing. Run while it's still learning. Run before it decides to stop experimenting and make its final move, because the next ranger might not be let go to tell the tale. The next encounter might be the one where it decides it's learned enough about us. And that's not a story I want to hear. This is Mikhail Petrov, former ranger of Eastern District 7, Tiger Forest Reserve. This is my testimony, my report, and my resignation letter all in one. Make of it what you will. But remember, in the deep forest, when electronics fail and the breathing sounds almost like words, run. Just run. Story 2. I'm Isabelle Laurent, and I've been a forest ranger at Parc National des Cévennes for 12 years. What happened during my night patrol last October made me question everything I knew about these woods. The first sign came during my regular evening patrol. I spotted them in the beam of my flashlight, footprints in the soft earth near the creek. They were deep, much deeper than normal human or animal tracks. I knelt down to examine them closer. Each print was at least 45 centimeters long and 20 centimeters wide. The stride length between them measured over a meter. I took photos and measurements, then radioed back to headquarters. Found unusual tracks near Sector 7, too large for local wildlife, requesting permission to investigate. They approved, but warned me to maintain radio contact every 30 minutes. I followed the tracks for about half a kilometer before they disappeared into rocky terrain. The sun was setting, and I needed to get back to my cabin. That night, I reviewed the photos, but couldn't match them to any known species. Not even the largest brown bears left prints that size. The second night, I heard it. I was doing paperwork when heavy footsteps crunched through the leaves outside. The sound circled my cabin slowly. Thud, crunch, thud, crunch. Whatever it was, it moved on 2 legs, not 4. The steps were too evenly spaced for a quadruped. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, but stayed inside. The footsteps continued for almost an hour before fading into the forest. The next morning, I found fresh tracks identical to the ones by the creek. They formed a complete circle around my cabin. During my patrol that evening, I discovered deep claw marks on several trees near my usual route. The gouges were over 2 meters high and penetrated deep into the bark. Each groove was thick as my thumb. I took more photos and samples, but the lab results were inconclusive. That night, the footsteps returned. They were closer this time. I could hear heavy breathing between the steps, deep, rhythmic breaths that sounded almost human, but not quite. The breaths came from higher up than a person's head would be. I estimated the source at around 2.5 meters off the ground. I switched off all my lights and watched through the window. The moon was bright enough to see shadows moving between the trees, something large, something that walked upright. But every time it passed through a patch of moonlight, I could only catch glimpses of dark fur. The third night was the worst. The creature became bolder. It approached within meters of my cabin. Its breathing was loud enough to hear clearly through the walls. I sat in the dark with my rifle, watching its shadow pass back and forth across my windows. At around 3 a.m. it started testing the walls, gentle pushes at first, then harder. The wooden walls creaked under its strength. I heard sniffing at every window one by one. When it reached the kitchen window, a massive shape blocked out the moonlight completely. I raised my rifle but didn't fire. Without a clear shot or immediate threat, shooting would only anger it. The shape lingered at the window for several minutes. I could hear it smelling the air, taking long, deep breaths. Then it moved to my front door. The handle rattled, just once, very deliberately, like it was testing to see if the door was locked. The wood groaned as something heavy leaned against it. I clicked off my rifle's safety. "This is Ranger Laurent," I shouted. "I am armed. Back away from the door." The pressure on the door stopped. For a long moment, there was complete silence. Then a sound came from directly outside. A low, rumbling vocalization, unlike anything I'd heard before. Not quite a growl, not quite speech. The sound made the windows vibrate. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Laurent. I have a situation at Cabin 7. Unknown creature attempting entry, requesting immediate backup." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Laurent. Units en route. ETA 25 minutes. Maintain position and do not engage unless threatened." The creature heard the radio. It moved away from the door, but didn't leave. For the next 20 minutes, it paced around the cabin. Sometimes it would stop and rock back and forth on its feet, making the ground vibrate. Other times, it would scrape its claws across the walls, leaving long grooves in the wood. 5 minutes before backup arrived, it left. The footsteps receded quickly into the forest. When the patrol vehicles pulled up, their spotlights revealed fresh tracks and claw marks all around the cabin. The marks on my door were 1/2 meter long and deep enough to need repair. We organized a search at first light, but found nothing except more tracks leading deeper into the forest. The labs analyzed hair samples caught in the bark, but the results were inconclusive. All they could say was that it came from an unknown primate species. I requested a transfer the next day. They assigned me to a different sector with a new cabin. But I still check my doors and windows 3 times each night. And sometimes when I'm on patrol, I hear heavy footsteps in the distance. They're always behind me, just out of sight, and they're getting closer. The investigation remains open. We've installed cameras and tracking stations throughout the area, but they're frequently damaged or disabled. Other rangers have reported similar encounters, but never as close or prolonged as mine. The official report lists it as an unknown large mammal, possibly ursine. But bears don't walk upright for hours. They don't systematically test windows and doors, and they don't leave footprints that match the plaster casts we made that night. I've worked these forests for over a decade. I know every animal species that calls them home. Whatever visited my cabin that week wasn't in any of our wildlife guides. The forensics team estimated its height at between 2.5 and 3 meters, based on the claw mark positions. Its weight, judging by the depth of the footprints, would be around 300 kilograms. Last week, I found a new set of tracks near my current cabin. They were fresh, made sometime during the night, the same size and shape as before. And like before, they formed a perfect circle around the building. I've requested another transfer. There are plenty of forest ranger positions in other parks. Places with normal wildlife and normal-sized tracks. Places where the night patrol doesn't include checking your roof for claw marks or listening for footsteps that shouldn't exist. But part of me knows it doesn't matter where I transfer. The creature proved it can track me. It proved it can find me. And sooner or later, it's going to do more than just test my locks. I keep my rifle loaded now. I've installed extra locks and reinforced my windows. My cameras run 24/7, though they never seem to capture anything clear, just shadows and blurry movement at the edge of the frame. The other rangers don't talk about it much. They file their reports and avoid night patrols in that sector. The official line is that it's probably a bear with unusual behaviors. But I've seen bears. I've tracked bears. This is something else. Tomorrow I start my last week at this post. My transfer to Pyrenees National Park goes through on Monday. It's a 6-hour drive south. The terrain is different there. More mountains, less forest. Maybe that will be enough. But tonight I heard it again. That same heavy breathing outside my window. Those same measured footsteps circling my cabin. And this time, when it vocalized, it sounded almost like laughter. End of official report. Ranger Isabelle Laurent, Parc National des Cévennes, October 15, 2023. Story 3. The memory card from my camera contained 847 photos from that night. The last image shows something I still can't explain. My name is Yuki Tanaka, and I'm a wildlife photographer specializing in nocturnal deer behavior. What happened during my last photography session in the Hokkaido wilderness changed my life forever. I'd set up my blind at the edge of a clearing, 2 miles from the nearest access road. It was late October, rutting season for the local deer population. The temperature was dropping, around 3 degrees Celsius, when I started my session at 6:15 p.m. I had my standard gear, Canon EOS R5, 3 lenses, infrared camera, motion sensors, and enough supplies for 48 hours. The first 3 hours were routine. I photographed 2 young bucks and several does. The motion sensors picked up regular deer movement patterns. My blind was well concealed, 15 feet up a sturdy oak tree. I had clear sight lines in all directions. At 9:47 p.m., the deer suddenly left the area, all of them. They didn't bolt or show signs of panic. They just moved away purposefully, as if responding to some signal I couldn't detect. The forest went completely silent. No birds, no small animals, nothing. I checked my equipment. Temperature had dropped to -2 Celsius. Moon was full, providing good natural light. Wind speed less than 5 mph from the northwest. Perfect conditions for photography. But something felt wrong. The silence was absolute. At 10:13 p.m. I heard the first unusual sound, a wet, heavy noise like something large feeding. It came from beyond my visible range, approximately 100 meters north of my position. I mounted my 600mm lens and aimed it toward the sound. The camera's autofocus couldn't lock onto anything. I switched to manual focus, scanning slowly. The feeding sounds continued. They were loud enough to hear clearly at this distance, which meant whatever was eating was big. Very big. The smell hit me at 10:22 p.m. Rotting meat and wet fur. It was strong enough to make my eyes water. I've photographed predator kills before. This was different. This smell was overwhelming, chemical almost. My nose started bleeding. I heard movement in the underbrush. Heavy steps, not like a bear or a deer. The gait was wrong. The stride length was too long. Whatever it was, it walked on 2 legs. The steps came closer to my blind. At 10:31 p.m., my motion sensors started failing. One by one, they went dark on my monitor. Not low battery warnings, they just died. My cameras started showing interference patterns. The infrared camera displayed only static. I stayed absolutely still. The walking stopped directly beneath my blind. The feeding sounds were clear now, cracking bones, tearing flesh, wet, slurping noises. My hands shook as I tried to photograph whatever was below me. The autofocus still wouldn't work. Manual focus showed only darkness, but I could hear it, smell it. The blind creaked as something brushed against its support pole. 10:47 p.m. A new sound, sniffing. Long, powerful inhalations. The thing below had caught my scent. The feeding sound stopped. The sniffing moved up the tree. I controlled my breathing, kept the camera ready, tried to stay silent. The blind was rated for 500 pounds of weight. The metal creaked. Something much heavier than 500 pounds was climbing the tree. At 10:52 p.m., a massive hand gripped the edge of my blind. The fingers were wrong, too long, too many joints. The nails were black, curved, longer than my fingers. The skin was grey, covered in patchy fur. I shot a burst of photos. The flash illuminated something that shouldn't exist. A face appeared at the blind's edge. Not animal, not human. The eyes reflected red in the flash. The mouth contained too many teeth, arranged in wrong directions. The thing pulled itself up with impossible speed. The blind platform bent under its weight. I smelled its breath, like rotten meat and chemicals. Hot saliva dripped onto my arm, burning like acid. I had one chance. I threw my backup flash unit past the creature and fired it remotely. The bright light stunned it for 2 seconds. I jumped from the blind, hitting every branch on the way down. My left arm broke when I landed. I ran. The thing roared. The sound wasn't animal or human. It was like metal scraping on metal, amplified to impossible volume. Trees shook. My ears rang. Warm blood ran down my neck from my eardrums. I ran without direction. The roaring continued. Heavy footsteps chased me, fast, too fast for something that big. I lost my pack, my spare cameras, kept only the Canon with its memory card. The pursuit lasted 14 minutes. I know because my camera was still recording timestamps. Every few seconds, I heard those steps getting closer. The smell got stronger. More blood dripped from my nose and ears. I broke through to a road at 11:13 p.m. Headlights approached. A logging truck. The footsteps behind me stopped. The smell faded. The blood stopped flowing from my nose. The truck driver found me in shock, babbling about cameras and teeth. He called emergency services. I spent 3 days in the hospital with a broken arm, burst eardrums, and chemical burns on my right arm where the saliva had landed. The memory card survived. 847 photos from that night. Most are normal. Deer, forest scenes, darkness. But the last 3 frames show something. The first is blurred, just a giant grey hand with too many joints. The second shows those reflecting eyes and wrong teeth. The third photo is clear, too clear. I don't look at it anymore. I submitted it to my editor. They said it was too blurry to publish. But I know what I saw. I know what's in that image. The authorities searched the area. They found my blind, crushed and torn from the tree. They found pieces of my equipment scattered over 2 miles of forest. They found large tracks that they claimed were from a bear, though no bear walks on 2 legs or leaves chemical burns. The deer haven't returned to that part of the forest. No animals have. The rangers installed new motion sensors last month. They all failed within 24 hours. No one goes there at night anymore. I switched to photographing cityscapes, sold all my wildlife gear. The chemical burn on my arm left scars in a pattern that doesn't match any known animal. Sometimes they throb when I smell meat cooking. The memory card is locked in a safety deposit box. I don't show the last photo to anyone anymore. The last person who saw it disappeared 3 days later. The police found their car at the edge of those same woods. The vehicle was crushed from above, like something huge had landed on it. I'm breaking my silence now because people need to know. Something is hunting in those woods. Something that walks on 2 legs, moves faster than a car, and burns flesh with its touch. Something that knows how to disable electronics, climb trees, and track by scent. The official report says I experienced hypothermia and hallucinations, that I fell from my blind in a panic over a bear, that the chemical burns came from spilled camera battery acid. But I know what happened. I have the proof in that last frame. I just can't show it, won't show it, because that thing is still out there, still hunting, and it learns from every encounter. This is my statement, my record of events. The timestamps are exact. I copied them from the photo metadata before locking away the memory card. The measurements and descriptions are precisely what I witnessed. If you're in the wilderness and the animals suddenly go quiet, if your electronics start to fail and you smell rotting meat and chemicals, Don't try to photograph it. Don't try to study it. Run. Run while you still can. Because the next photographer might not be so lucky. The next encounter might not end with just a broken arm and some burns. And the next photo might show more than anyone was ever meant to see. This is Yuki Tanaka, former wildlife photographer. This is my testimony and my warning. When the forest goes silent and the smell of death fills the air, don't reach for your camera. Run. Just run. Story 4. My name is Klaus Weber. I've been hiking the Swiss Alps for over 20 years. What I encountered during my solo trek last winter made me question everything I thought I knew about these mountains. The morning started like any other alpine hike. I checked my gear at the Grindelwald station: backpack, emergency beacon, crampons, ice axe, satellite phone, food for 3 days. The forecast showed clear skies with temperatures around 5 degrees C. Perfect conditions for winter hiking. I took the early trail toward Kleine Scheidegg. The snow was fresh from yesterday's storm, about 30 centimeters deep. My boots left clean tracks in the powder. I'd done this route dozens of times. The first section follows a well-marked path through a sparse forest before opening into the higher alpine meadows. 3 hours into the hike, I noticed the first unusual tracks. They crossed my path at a diagonal, heading toward the tree line. I stopped to examine them. Each print was massive, at least 50 centimeters long and 25 wide. The stride length measured over 1.5 meters. The tracks were fresh, made within the last hour. The edges were still sharp in the snow. Whatever made them walked on 2 legs. The prints showed 5 distinct toe impressions, like a human foot, but 3 times larger. I took photos with my phone and compared the tracks to my own boot prints. The unknown tracks sank much deeper, suggesting something extremely heavy. I estimated the creature's weight at over 200 kilograms based on the impression depth. The tracks followed no logical path. They zigzagged between trees, sometimes doubling back on themselves. At one point, they circled a large pine tree 3 times before continuing. The pattern seemed deliberate, like something searching for something. I checked my satellite phone. No signal. My GPS still worked, showing my position about 8 kilometers from the nearest shelter. The sun hung low in the winter sky. I had maybe 4 hours of daylight left. I decided to continue, but picked up my pace. The original tracks disappeared into the forest, and I lost sight of them. An hour later, I found more prints crossing my path. These were fresher, the snow still crumbling at the edges. My hands shook as I took more photos. These new tracks paralleled my intended route, staying just inside the tree line. Whatever made them was moving in the same direction as me. A branch snapped in the forest to my right. I spun around but saw nothing except snow-laden trees. The winter silence felt heavy. No bird calls, no wind, just the sound of my own breathing. I checked my map. The nearest emergency shelter was 3 kilometers ahead. I could make it before dark if I hurried. I started walking faster, my crampons crunching in the snow. Another set of tracks appeared, cutting across my path from the opposite direction. These were minutes old. The snow hadn't even settled in the depressions. I stopped and looked around slowly. The forest stood silent on both sides. Nothing moved. My hands trembled as I unclipped my ice axe. The metal felt cold and reassuring. I took deep breaths to slow my racing heart. The logical part of my brain said it must be some unknown animal. The primitive part screamed at me to run. I chose a middle path, a fast walk while scanning my surroundings. The sun touched the mountain peaks. The temperature dropped noticeably. In the lengthening shadows, every tree looked like a towering figure. 1 kilometer from the shelter, I found more tracks. These formed a wide circle, intersecting my path at 2 points. The circle was at least 100 meters in diameter. I stood in the center, turning slowly. The prints seemed fresher the further they went. Then I saw it. The tracks didn't form a circle. They formed a spiral, growing tighter with each rotation, and I was standing at the center. My emergency beacon felt heavy in my pocket. Activating it would bring a helicopter, if the weather held. But the clouds were rolling in fast. Night rescue operations were dangerous in the Alps. They might not come until morning. A low thud came from the forest, like something heavy landing in snow, then another, closer. The sound repeated, moving in an arc around my position. Each impact came from a different direction. I clicked on my headlamp, even though some daylight remained. The beam caught only trees and swirling snow. The thuds continued their circular pattern. Whatever made them was staying just outside my light's range. My hands squeezed the ice axe handle. Sweat froze on my back. The impacts grew closer with each rotation. I turned in place, trying to track the sound. It moved too fast, always behind me no matter which way I faced. A deep breath echoed through the trees, not my own. The sound came from above head height, somewhere in the darkness. Another breath answered from the opposite direction, then another. The sounds formed a circle around me. I broke into a run. The shelter was close. My headlamp beam bounced wildly across the snow. Behind me, the impacts accelerated. They weren't even trying to stay hidden now. Heavy footfalls crunched through the snow, gaining ground. The impacts split up, some moving to flank me on both sides. I ran faster, my lungs burning in the cold air. My light caught glimpses of movement among the trees, tall, dark shapes moving upright through the forest. The shelter appeared ahead, a small wooden building with metal shutters. I crashed against the door, fumbling with the entry code. My fingers slipped on the keypad. Behind me, snow crunched under heavy feet. The lock clicked. I yanked the door open and dove inside, slamming it behind me. My trembling hands shot the bolt home. The metal shutters were already closed for the night, locked from the inside. Something heavy walked onto the shelter's wooden deck. The boards creaked under its weight. More footsteps joined it, coming from all sides. They paced the perimeter, testing each window and door. I huddled in the corner, ice axe ready. My headlamp illuminated the small room, 4 bunks, a table, emergency supplies. The walls were thick, designed to withstand alpine storms. But the sounds outside weren't from any storm. The creatures circled for hours. Sometimes they scratched at the walls. Sometimes they breathed heavily against the shutters. Once they had what sounded like a conversation, deep, rumbling vocalizations that made the windows vibrate. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back to the wall, watching the door. Around midnight, snow started falling. The wind picked up, howling through the peaks. The sounds outside gradually faded. Dawn came grey and clouded. I waited an extra hour before opening the door. Fresh snow had filled most of the tracks, but some remained visible on the covered deck, huge 5-toed prints pressed deep into the wood. I activated my emergency beacon. The helicopter picked me up an hour later. I reported the incident to the Alpine Rescue Service. They found more tracks around the shelter, along with deep scratches in the outer walls. The marks were too high for a standing person to make. The official report blamed it on winter disorientation and possibly bears, though bears don't walk upright for hours or hunt in coordinated groups. They don't leave humanoid tracks or try to circle their prey. I still hike the Alps, but never alone, and never in that area. Sometimes on snowy nights, I wake up thinking I hear heavy footsteps circling my house. And every winter, more reports come in from that region. Stories of giant tracks in the snow, of hikers being stalked by unseen creatures, of things that move upright through the forest at night. The authorities maintain there must be a natural explanation. They say the Alps hold no unknown large species, but they've started posting warnings about hiking alone in that area. The signs don't mention footprints or circling predators. They simply advise staying on marked trails and returning before dark. Last month, another hiker disappeared there. They found his gear scattered in a spiral pattern with those same giant tracks all around. The search dogs refuse to follow the trail. The official report calls it an avalanche accident, despite the lack of avalanche signs. I've mapped every incident reported in that region. They form a pattern, a huge spiral across the mountains, growing larger each year. Like something is searching, expanding its territory. And sometimes, on clear nights, hikers at the Kleine Scheidegg station report strange sounds from the forest. Heavy footsteps in the snow, deep breathing in the darkness, and low, rumbling conversations in a language that sounds almost, but not quite, human. End of witness statement. Klaus Weber, Swiss Alpine Club, February 15, 2024. Story 5. The lab results came back yesterday. The DNA found on the moose carcasses doesn't match any known species. I need to document what happened before the university tries to bury this. My name is Dr. Lars Nilsson, and I lead the Large Predator Research Initiative at the University of Stockholm. This is my account of what we encountered during our field research in the northern boreal forest last month. Our team consisted of 4 people: myself, Dr. Maria Santos, wildlife biologist, Eric Anderson, field technician, and Dmitry Volkov, graduate student. We were investigating a series of unusual moose deaths reported by local hunters. Our initial survey area covered 50 square kilometers of dense forest. Day 1 started routinely. We established our base camp at coordinates 67°41 N, 20°13 E. Weather conditions: clear, temperature 2°C, wind 5 mph northwest. Standard equipment deployment: motion-activated cameras, audio recorders, GPS trackers. The first unusual observation came at 14:20. We found the first moose carcass 3.2 kilometers northeast of base camp. The kill pattern was wrong. Adult bull moose, healthy based on tooth wear and bone condition. No signs of struggle. The carcass was partially eaten, but the bite marks didn't match any known predator. The spacing between teeth impressions measured 7.2 centimeters. That's twice the size of an adult brown bear's dentition. Maria took tissue samples. Eric photographed the site. Dmitry mapped the location and started looking for tracks. The ground around the carcass was disturbed in a systematic way, not random animal movement. It looked deliberate, like something had been conducting its own examination of the kill. We found 3 more carcasses before sunset. Same pattern. All healthy adult moose. All killed cleanly. All partially eaten with the same unusual bite marks. All surrounded by that systematic ground disturbance. The carcasses formed a perfect triangle with the first kill at the center. The motion cameras started malfunctioning at 19:45. Not battery failure, they just stopped recording. The audio equipment picked up unusual frequencies that overwhelmed the recording system. We had to shut it down to prevent damage to the hardware. At 20:30, we found the tree markings. Claw marks in the bark, starting at ground level and reaching up to 2.5 meters. They formed distinct patterns, 3 parallel lines, spaced exactly 15 centimeters apart. We found these markings on every tree in a 100-meter radius. All faced inward, toward our location. Eric calculated the force required to make such deep gouges in the bark. His estimate, around 2,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. That's stronger than any known land predator. Night fell at 21:10. Temperature dropped to -5°C. The forest went silent. No bird calls, no insect sounds. Even the wind seemed to die. We collected our samples and headed back to base camp. The silence followed us. At 22:45, we heard the first vocalization. It came from the northeast, approximately 500 meters from camp. The sound didn't match anything in our database. It was multitonal, with frequencies ranging from 10 Hz to 40 kHz based on our equipment readings. The pattern suggested intelligence, not random animal calls. The sound moved, fast. It circled our camp in under 30 seconds. That meant whatever made it was moving at over 40 mph, through dense forest in complete darkness. We activated our perimeter lights. They died immediately. Dimitri's satellite phone stopped working, then the radio, then our backup communications. The temperature around our camp dropped another 10 degrees in 5 minutes. Impossible without some external influence. At 23:15, the movement started. Heavy footsteps, bipedal gait, stride length, approximately 2.5 meters based on sound intervals. Simple physics told us we were dealing with something massive, something that shouldn't exist. Maria spotted it first. Her thermal imaging camera caught movement at the forest edge. The heat signature was wrong, too hot for a mammal, around 45 degrees. The shape was roughly humanoid but huge, over 3 meters tall, based on thermal imaging scale. It stepped into the clearing at 23:17. Our remaining electronics died simultaneously. Even our battery-powered flashlights failed. The only light came from our campfire. The creature stayed just beyond the firelight. We saw its eyes first. Reflective, like most predators, but with a red tint that didn't match any known tapetum lucidum configuration. They were set too high off the ground, at least 2.8 meters up. Eric activated our emergency flare. The creature moved faster than our eyes could track. The flare illuminated massive limbs, grey skin, wrongly proportioned joints. Before the light died, we saw its face. The anatomy was impossible. Features from multiple species combined in ways that defied evolution. It took our specimens, moved through our camp like it knew exactly where everything was, took all our sample containers, our storage equipment, every piece of recording device. It left our food, our camping gear, our personal items. It knew what it was looking for. The attack lasted 42 seconds. No one was injured. The creature could have killed us easily. Instead, it systematically eliminated all physical evidence of its existence. Even the claw marks on the trees disappeared. The marked sections of bark were removed with surgical precision. We waited until dawn. The forest stayed silent. When sunlight finally came at 06:50, we hiked out. Our vehicles had been tampered with. Everything electronic was dead. We walked 22 kilometers to the nearest ranger station. The official investigation found nothing. The moose carcasses were gone. The ground disturbance was erased. Our equipment vanished. Even our photographs and audio recordings were corrupted. Every storage device showed the same random pattern of zeros and ones. But we had followed protocols. We sent preliminary data uploads to the university server every hour. Most were corrupted, but one got through. A single thermal image and 7 seconds of audio. The university classified it immediately. They ordered us to sign non-disclosure agreements, threatened our funding, our careers. 3 days later, someone broke into our lab. They knew the security codes, knew exactly where we stored our backup drives. They took everything related to the incident. The university claimed it was a random break-in. Maria quit. She's teaching high school biology now. Eric took a job in Antarctica. He said he needed somewhere with no forest. Dimitri switched his thesis topic to marine biology. I'm writing this account because the world needs to know. Something intelligent is hunting in our forests. Something that understands technology, that can eliminate evidence, that learns and adapts. The DNA results from the one tissue sample we managed to hide showed characteristics from multiple species, combined in ways that shouldn't be possible. The thermal image showed a creature that breaks the laws of biology. The audio recording captured sounds that shouldn't exist in nature. Both files vanished from my computer as I tried to analyze them. The backups disappeared too. This is my testimony. The coordinates, times, and measurements are exact. I memorized everything before they took our records. I've sent copies of this account to multiple sources. Some will probably vanish. Maybe all of them will. If you're conducting research in the deep forest and your equipment starts failing, if you find kills that don't make sense, if you hear sounds that shouldn't exist, pack up, leave. Don't try to study it. Don't try to prove anything. Because it's studying us too, learning our methods, adapting, and it's better at erasing evidence than we are at collecting it. This is Dr. Lars Nilsson. This is my report, my warning, and my resignation from the Large Predator Research Initiative. Let someone else study what hunts in those woods. I've seen enough to know when science should stop asking questions. Story 6. My name is Akiko Tanaka. I've been a wildlife photographer for 15 years, specializing in remote mountain regions of Japan. What I captured through my lens last autumn in the Ural Mountains changed my understanding of what lives in our forests. I'd been tracking an unusual pattern of deer movements near Mount Hotaka. Local hunters reported entire herds suddenly changing their migration routes. My editor at National Geographic wanted photos documenting this behavioral shift. I set up my blind at a natural bottleneck between two ridges. It was a prime location, a narrow valley where deer tracks concentrated. I arrived before dawn, carrying my usual gear: Canon R5 with a 600mm lens, tripod, backup batteries, supplies for 12 hours, emergency beacon, and satellite phone. The morning started normally. I photographed several small groups of deer moving through the valley. Around 10 a.m., something changed. The birds stopped singing all at once. The sudden silence hit like a physical force. I checked my camera settings: 1000 sec, f5.6, ISO 400. Through my viewfinder, I watched a group of deer freeze in place. Their ears swiveled frantically, their nostrils flared. Then they bolted, not down the valley, but straight up the steep hillside. Small animals erupted from the underbrush. Foxes and rabbits ran in the same direction as the deer. A flock of crows burst from the trees, their wings loud in the silence. Every animal moved like something was chasing them. I switched my camera to video mode. The screen showed empty forest. Nothing moved. The silence felt wrong. No birds, no insects, not even wind in the trees. A branch snapped behind my blind. The sound came from high up, above head height. I turned slowly, camera ready. Through the gaps in the branches, I caught glimpses of something moving, something large. My hands shook slightly as I focused the lens. Whatever it was walked on two legs. It moved deliberately, picking its path through the trees. I started shooting, the camera's silent mode keeping my position hidden. The creature stood at least 2.5 meters tall. Dark fur covered its body. Its movements were smooth, almost human-like, but its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, shoulders too broad, head sitting directly on massive shoulders with barely any neck. I took burst shots as it moved. Most frames caught only pieces: a muscled arm, a fur-covered back, massive feet crushing the underbrush. But one frame caught it turning. For a split second, its face looked directly at my lens. The image is burned into my memory, a face that straddled the line between human and animal. Heavy brow ridges, deep-set eyes that showed intelligence, powerful jaw. But the eyes, they knew I was there. The creature vanished into the forest. I reviewed my photos with trembling hands. Most were blurred or partially obscured by branches, but that one clear frame. A deep breath sounded from my right, then another from my left. More creatures had moved to flank my position. I could hear them breathing, slow and controlled. They were coordinating. I packed my gear as quietly as possible. The satellite phone showed no signal. The emergency beacon felt heavy in my pocket. Using it would draw attention. I needed to move first. Leaves rustled as something large circled behind my blind. The breathing sounds moved closer. A branch cracked under heavy weight. They were tightening the circle. I burst from the blind, running downhill toward the valley floor. Heavy footsteps crashed through the forest behind me. They weren't trying to stay quiet anymore. The impacts shook small rocks loose that bounced past me. My lungs burned as I ran. The camera bag slapped against my back. Behind me, the creatures called to each other, deep, resonant vocalizations that carried through the trees. They were coordinating their pursuit. I reached the valley floor and sprinted toward my vehicle. The footsteps split up, some moving to cut off my route. They knew the terrain better than me. They were herding me. A dark shape moved through the trees to my left, easily keeping pace. Another paralleled me on the right. Both ran upright with long, fluid strides. Their movements showed years of experience navigating this terrain. My car appeared ahead, an old Suzuki Jimny parked on the forest road. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. The footsteps grew closer. Something heavy breathed just beyond the tree line. I yanked the door open and dove inside, slamming it shut. The key slipped in my trembling fingers before finding the ignition. The engine roared to life. Through the windows, dark shapes moved at the forest edge. I accelerated down the dirt road, gravel spraying. In my rearview mirror, 3 massive figures stepped onto the road. They watched my departure. One raised its arm in what looked almost like a wave. The police were skeptical until I showed them the photos. Most were too blurry to make out details. But that one clear frame. They confiscated my memory card, said it was for my own protection. The official report calls it a case of misidentified wildlife, probably bears. But bears don't coordinate hunting strategies. They don't herd prey. They don't stand upright for extended periods or wave goodbye. I've researched similar incidents in the region. Local hunters whisper about large, upright creatures in the deep forest, about hunting parties being stalked by intelligent predators, about animals fleeing from something that moves on 2 legs. The magazine killed the story, said it was too controversial. They ran a piece about deer migration patterns instead, but they kept the photos, locked them away in some archive. I still work as a wildlife photographer, but never in that region. I've turned down multiple assignments there. The local hunters understand. They've seen the signs too. Broken trees too high for bears to reach, strange tracks in the mud, animals fleeing from unseen threats. Last month, another photographer went missing in those mountains. They found his camera smashed, memory card missing. The official report blames a bear attack, but the tracks around his camp. I keep copies of those photos on a secure drive. That one clear frame haunts me, not because it shows something unknown to science, but because of the intelligence in those eyes. They knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted to be seen. Sometimes I wonder if they let me leave, if running to my car was part of their plan, a way to spread their story while maintaining plausible deniability, just blurry enough to doubt, just clear enough to make you wonder. The magazine called yesterday. They want to do a follow-up on the deer migration story. Same location, better equipment, larger budget. I declined, but others will go. They'll set up their blinds and wait with their cameras. And maybe, just maybe, something will step into frame. Something that walks on 2 legs. Something that wants to be seen. End of field report. Akiko Tanaka, wildlife photographer, National Geographic contributor, October 12, 2023. Story 7. The footprints measured 19.7 inches long. That's what the police focused on when they finally reached us. My name is Chen Wei, and I've been leading hiking groups through the Ural Mountains for 12 years. What happened to my last tour group made me quit the profession forever. It started as a standard 5-day trek. 8 clients, 3 Americans, 2 Canadians, and 3 British tourists, all experienced hikers. We had proper permits, satellite phones, emergency beacons, and top-grade camping equipment. Weather forecast showed clear conditions. Day 1 went perfectly. We covered 12 kilometers of moderate terrain, elevation gain of 800 meters, made camp at 1830 in a sheltered valley, Standard perimeter setup, motion sensor lights, bare bells, tripwires with noisemakers. The first sign came at 04:17. The motion sensors triggered, but when I checked, there was nothing there. Just those footprints in the mud. They came from nowhere, stopped at our camp's edge, then vanished. No return tracks. The size and depth suggested something weighing at least 500 pounds walking on two legs. I photographed the prints and checked our position. 27°49 and 100°23 EE, elevation 3,200 meters. Too high for any known primates in this region. I radioed base camp to report the findings. The connection was clear for exactly 8 seconds, then dissolved into static. I woke the group at 06 Grau, told them about the tracks but kept it professional, said we'd stick to the plan but maintain tight formation. Sarah Chen, one of the Canadian clients, was a biologist. She examined the prints and took samples. The depth and compression patterns didn't match any known species. We broke camp at 07:30. The day was clear, temperature 15°C, wind minimal, perfect hiking conditions. But something felt wrong. No bird sounds, no small animals. The forest was dead quiet. At 10:45 we found more tracks, fresher. The stride length had increased to 3 meters. They paralleled our trail for 2 kilometers, always staying just within the tree line, always on 2 legs. Our electronics started failing at 12:30. First the GPS units, then satellite phones. Even watch batteries died. We had paper maps and compasses, but the compasses began spinning randomly. Basic equipment failure protocol said to turn back. But the tracks now formed a complete circle around our position. Every direction showed those same huge footprints. We made camp early, at 15 now. Higher ground, good visibility, rocky terrain. Less chance for something to approach unseen. I set up double perimeter warnings, motion sensors and tripwires, posted 2-person watch rotations. The sun set at 19:22, temperature dropped to 5°C. The silence grew deeper. No wind, no animal sounds. Even our voices seemed muffled, like something was absorbing the sound. First watch reported nothing unusual. Second watch too. At 23:45, during third watch, Bill Thompson, American client, reported movement in the trees. Slow, deliberate. Something big moving just beyond our light range. The motion sensors didn't trigger. The tripwires stayed intact, but we all heard it. Heavy footsteps, branches breaking under massive weight. The sound circled our camp for exactly 17 minutes. At year 012, we heard the first vocalization. Not animal, not human. A multi-toned sound that made our ears hurt. Bass frequencies below human hearing range, but we felt them in our bones. Sarah's audio recorder captured 3 seconds before melting. The plastic literally melted. The smell hit us next, like rotting meat and ozone. Chemical. Wrong. 2 clients vomited. My nose started bleeding. The air temperature around us dropped 15 degrees in under a minute. It showed itself at 00:27, stepped into the moonlight at the camp's edge. I'm writing this clinically, factually, but there's no proper way to describe what we saw. Height, approximately 3.5 meters. Weight estimate, over 500 kilograms. Basic humanoid shape, but wrong. All wrong. The proportions didn't work. Arms too long, joints bent in impossible ways. Skin grey and mottled, covered in patchy fur. The face. I won't describe the face. Can't describe it. The human mind doesn't have reference points for something like that. It stood there for 92 seconds, watching. Steam rising from its body in the cold air. Eyes reflecting red in our remaining flashlight beam. Then it spoke. The sound wasn't speech as we know it, but it had patterns, repetition, clear intent. 3 distinct vocalizations. After each one of our electronic devices would die. It was testing, learning, showing us it could control our technology. At 00:31, it moved, faster than possible for its size, grabbed our supply cache and crushed it. metal containers crumpled like paper. It took all our cameras, phones, recording devices, ignored our food, water, survival gear. It knew exactly what it wanted. Sarah tried to take a photo with her backup camera. The thing moved again, covered 30 meters in under a second. Took the camera so quickly she didn't realize it was gone until she found the strap had been surgically cut from her neck. It retreated to the tree line, stood watching us. More vocalizations. The temperature kept dropping. Frost formed on our tents. The thing raised one massive hand and made a gesture. Deliberate, almost like sign language. Then it screamed. The sound hit us physically. 2 clients passed out. My ears bled. Car alarms started going off in the valley 5 kilometers below us. The scream lasted 7 seconds, modulating through frequencies that shouldn't exist in nature. When the sound stopped, the thing was gone. The forest remained silent. We stayed awake until dawn, huddled together, watching. Nothing else approached. At first light, we found new tracks. They formed a perfect spiral around our camp, getting closer with each circuit. We hiked out at maximum speed, made a 3-day journey in 14 hours. Every electronic device we had was dead, batteries drained, circuits fried. Even the emergency beacon was silent. The police found us on the main trail. They focused on the footprints, took photographs, made plaster casts. Within 24 hours, all physical evidence disappeared. The plaster casts crumbled into powder. The photographs showed only blank frames. The official report says we encountered an unknown bear species. Says mass hysteria explains the shared descriptions. Says equipment failure was due to a localized electromagnetic storm. But they can't explain the pattern of those tracks. Can't explain how something that heavy moved without triggering motion sensors. Can't explain the technological interference or the impossible sounds. 4 of my clients were hospitalized with severe hypothermia, despite weather records showing temperatures well above freezing. 3 others suffered inexplicable radiation burns. Sarah's camera strap showed clean cuts made by a tool sharper than any surgical instrument. I've led 147 tours through those mountains. Know every trail, every valley, every local animal species. What we encountered wasn't natural, wasn't from this place. It showed intelligence, purpose, understanding of our technology. The authorities deny everything. The tour company buried the incident, but we all saw it, all heard it, all still carry the marks, physical and otherwise. I'm writing this account because people need to know. Something is hunting in those mountains, something that can disable our technology, move faster than human sight, and mimic human behavior. It's studying us, learning from each encounter. The coordinates and timestamps are exact. I memorized everything before our devices failed. The measurements and observations are precise. This isn't a story meant to frighten. It's a warning. If you're hiking in remote areas and your electronics start failing, if you find tracks too big to be natural, if the forest goes silent, don't document, don't investigate, run. Run while it's still observing. Run before it decides to do more than watch. This is Chen Wei, former mountain guide, now city tour operator. This is my statement, my evidence, my truth. When the silence falls and the cold comes, don't try to understand what's watching. Just run. Story 8. My name is Miguel Herrera. I've been a professional trail guide in the Chilean Andes for 17 years. What I encountered during a routine trek last spring made me question everything I know about these mountains. I was leading a group of 6 hikers through the Cochamo Valley. Standard 3-day route, moderate difficulty. The clients were experienced, 2 Canadian couples and 2 solo German hikers. All had mountain experience. The first warning came 6 hours into day 1. We found a clearing where several trees were snapped. Not cut, not fallen, snapped. The breaks were clean, about 4 meters up. The wood showed marks like giant hands had gripped and twisted. I've seen storm damage and avalanche destruction. This was different. The breaks were too precise, too deliberate. Some trees were twisted completely around, their tops pointing back toward their roots. No natural force does that. I took photos and GPS coordinates. The clients gathered around asking questions. I gave them the standard response about storm damage. But storms don't break trees at exactly the same height. Storms don't leave finger-like impressions in the bark. We made camp 2 kilometers past the clearing. Standard procedure, tents in a circle, food stored away from camp, watch rotations set up. The temperature dropped to 5 degrees Celsius. Clear sky, quarter moon, good visibility. The sounds started at 2 a.m. Deep, rhythmic thuds from the forest. Like heavy footsteps, but too high up to be a person, too regular to be falling branches. The impacts moved in a circle around our camp. I woke the group quietly. We gathered in the center of the tent circle. The thuds grew closer. Whatever made them walked on 2 legs. The rhythm was bipedal, not 4-footed like a puma or bear. The steps paused at the edge of our lamplight. Heavy breathing came from the darkness. Not animal breathing. It was controlled, almost human-like. But it came from above head height, maybe 3 meters up. Small rocks skittered down the slope as something massive shifted its weight. The breathing sound multiplied. More creatures had joined the first. They spaced themselves evenly around our camp. My hands shook as I checked the satellite phone. No signal. The emergency beacon would bring help, but it would take hours. We were alone with whatever circled us. Low vocalizations rumbled from the darkness. Not quite speech, not quite animal calls. The sounds had structure, like the creatures were communicating. They called back and forth, coordinating their positions. One of the German hikers snapped a photo with flash. The light caught a glimpse of something moving between trees. Tall, fur-covered, walking upright. The photo later showed only a blur of dark motion. The creatures grew bolder as the night wore on. They took turns approaching the lamplight's edge. We caught glimpses of massive limbs, huge shoulders, hands bigger than dinner plates. They never fully revealed themselves, but they wanted us to know they were there. Around 4 a.m. they started breaking trees. We heard the sharp cracks echo through the valley. They snapped trunks like twigs, always at that same 4-meter height. The displays of strength were deliberate. They were sending a message. Dawn came slowly. As the sky lightened, the creatures withdrew. Their footsteps faded into the forest. We waited an extra hour before leaving our circle. The area around our camp was transformed. Broken trees formed a perfect ring, all snapped at the same height. Deep footprints marked the ground, 45 centimeters long, clearly showing 5 toes. The prints sank 10 centimeters into hard soil. We packed quickly and headed back toward the trailhead. No one wanted to continue deeper into the valley. The return trip was tense. We heard branches breaking behind us, always just out of sight. Heavy footsteps paralleled our route through the forest. Something followed us all the way out. It kept its distance but made sure we knew it was there. Sometimes we caught glimpses through the trees, a dark shape moving upright, easily keeping pace with our group. The authorities took our report but dismissed it as hysteria. They blamed the broken trees on wind damage. But wind doesn't leave footprints. Wind doesn't coordinate hunting patterns or make tools. Yes, tools. We found them later, examining our photos. Crude clubs made from broken branches, hidden just inside the tree line. Some showed wear patterns from repeated use. The creatures had prepared for our arrival. That was my last trek in Kochamo Valley. I guide in other areas now, safer routes with normal wildlife. But I hear stories from other guides. Stories of broken trees and massive footprints, of groups being surrounded at night, of intelligent creatures that hunt in coordinated packs. The official line hasn't changed. They say the Andes hold no unknown large primates, no creatures intelligent enough to make tools or coordinate attacks. but they've quietly stopped issuing permits for overnight treks in that valley. Last month, another group went missing there. Search teams found their camp destroyed. Trees broken in that same distinctive pattern. Footprints everywhere, along with something new, complex symbols carved into tree trunks at that 4-meter height. The symbols showed up in other locations too, always at the same height, always in areas with broken trees and massive footprints. Some experts say they show signs of linguistic structure. The authorities confiscated those photos. I mapped every incident reported in the region. They form a pattern, a slow expansion from that first valley, like something is spreading, establishing territory, testing our responses. The missing hikers were never found. The official report blames a storm, despite clear weather records. They found the group's cameras crushed into pieces. Every memory card was carefully removed and taken. Local hunters won't go near that valley now. They've seen the signs, broken trees, massive tracks, crude tools left as warnings. They know something lives there, something that walks upright, uses tools, and communicates with its own kind. I still have the photos from that night. Most show only blurred motion or partial glimpses, but one frame, taken just as the flash fired. The authorities missed it when they collected our cameras. I keep it locked away. The image shows a face in the darkness. Not human, but not fully animal either. Eyes that show intelligence, a massive brow ridge, powerful jaw. But it's the expression that haunts me. Not anger or aggression, but curiosity. Like it was studying us as much as we were studying it. Sometimes I wonder if they let us leave that night. If the whole encounter was a test, a way to observe our reactions, to learn our weaknesses, to plan for next time. The valley is officially closed now. They blame environmental concerns, but the warning signs show unusual icons, simplified versions of those tree-carved symbols, like someone is trying to communicate. And on quiet nights, when the wind blows from that direction, I hear them. Deep vocalizations carrying across the mountains, complex patterns of sound that almost form words. They're getting closer, they're getting bolder, and they're not alone anymore. End of guide report. Miguel Herrera, Chilean Mountain Guides Association, April 15, 2024. Story 9. The lab analysis confirms it. The symbols on the cave walls were made with human blood. Not just human blood, but mixed with something else, something our tests can't identify. I'm Dr. Isabelle Martinez, and this is my report of what I found in the Copper Canyon cave system last month. I need to document this before the university forces me to stop my research. I was conducting a standard geological survey, mapping previously unexplored cave branches in the Sierra Madre Occidental. Solo work, but I had 15 years of caving experience. Standard equipment, helmet cam, mapping tools, air quality monitors, 3 light sources, emergency beacon, 48 hours of supplies. The entrance was typical, 1.2 meters high, 0.8 meters wide. I logged it as Cave System 274B at 09.15. Temperature, 18 degrees 6. Humidity, 62%. Normal readings for the region. The first 100 meters were routine limestone formation. At 10:47, the cave opened into a larger chamber. Dimensions, 30 meters long, 12 meters wide, ceiling height, 8 meters. That's when I found the first markings. They weren't typical cave art or graffiti. The symbols were precise, geometric, arranged in repeating patterns across the walls. I took samples of the pigment using standard protocols. The color was wrong for ochre or other natural pigments, too red, too fresh-looking. The patterns covered every surface in perfect geometric spacing, each symbol exactly 15 centimeters apart. Perfect precision impossible for primitive tools. My magnetometer started giving strange readings at 11:23. The needle spun randomly. GPS signal was already gone, expected underground, but now my backup compass failed too. Air quality monitors showed normal oxygen levels, but detected an unknown chemical compound. I found the first bone pile at 11:45. Not a natural accumulation. The bones were sorted by size and type. Animal bones, mostly deer and small mammals. But some looked human. All had the same marks, precise cuts made by something sharper than any stone tool. The temperature dropped suddenly. My thermometer showed a 10-degree decrease in 3 minutes. The humidity sensors failed. A new smell filled the chamber, like copper and ozone. My nose started bleeding. At 12:10 I discovered the side passage. It was perfectly circular, 2 meters in diameter. The walls were smooth, polished almost. Not natural erosion, this was manufactured. The symbols continued inside, now accompanied by handprints. Adult human handprints made in fresh blood. I took more samples, documented everything on my helmet cam. The blood wasn't dry. Carbon dating would later show it was less than 24 hours old. Tests would reveal it came from multiple human sources. The passage descended at a precise 15-degree angle for exactly 100 meters. I measured twice. The precision was impossible for natural formation. The temperature kept dropping. My electronic equipment began failing. First the air monitors, then my backup lights. I reached a new chamber at 13:45, larger, 50 meters across. The ceiling disappeared into darkness. The symbols here were different, larger, more complex. They seemed to move in my remaining light beam. Not an illusion. Something in the pigment was actively shifting. The bone piles here were organized differently. Concentric circles radiating from the center. Thousands of bones, all with those same precise cut marks. In the center stood a pillar of polished stone. Not stone, some black material I couldn't identify. It felt wrong under my fingers, too smooth, too cold. My last working light started flickering at 14:17. I heard the first sound then. Not an echo, not water. A deep vibration that made my teeth hurt. Regular pulses, like a heartbeat but wrong. Too slow, too powerful. The blood patterns on the walls began to glisten. Fresh drops formed and ran upward against gravity. The temperature hit -5 Celsius. My breath froze in the air. The vibrations got stronger. I saw movement at the chamber's edge at 14:32. Something massive shifted in the darkness. Not echoes or shadows, something physical. I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from multiple directions. My light died, complete darkness. But I could still see the symbols. They glowed now, a deep red light that hurt my eyes. The footsteps got closer. The air grew thick with that copper ozone smell. I turned on my helmet cam's infrared mode. The recording later showed nothing but static, but what I saw in that moment. The shapes that moved in the darkness weren't human, weren't animal. The proportions were wrong. Everything was wrong. They moved with purpose, intelligence. One approached the central pillar and touched it. The vibrations reached a pitch that made me black out. When I woke, my equipment was gone. All samples destroyed. But they left me alive, left me to see what came next. The symbols moved faster now, flowed like living things, formed new patterns I recognized, mathematical sequences, atomic structures, DNA helices. They were teaching something, learning something, using the cave as some kind of record or transmission. I had one emergency light stick left. I cracked it at 15:03. The chamber was empty of movement, but changed. The bone piles had been rearranged. Now they formed complex molecular structures. The blood on the walls had shifted to form new symbols, equations I recognized from advanced physics. My training told me to document everything. My instincts told me to run. I compromised, took photos with my backup phone camera while moving toward the exit. Every photo later showed blank frames. Every measurement I wrote down disappeared from my notebook. The emergency light died 50 meters from the entrance. I ran in total darkness. The vibrations followed. The symbols glowed brighter. I felt movement all around me, massive shapes just out of sight. Breathing that wasn't human, wasn't animal, wasn't anything I could identify. I reached the entrance at 15:47, collapsed outside. My nose was bleeding heavily. My eyes wouldn't focus. All my equipment was dead, batteries drained, circuits fried. Even my mechanical watch had stopped. The rescue team found me an hour later, when my emergency beacon finally activated. My body temperature was 35 degrees Celsius, hypothermic, despite the warm day. Blood tests showed high levels of radiation exposure and unknown chemical compounds in my system. I led 5 separate search parties back to the cave. We never found it. The entire branch of the system had disappeared. The rock face showed no entrance, no signs of recent movement or collapse. Ground-penetrating radar showed nothing but solid limestone. The university ordered me to stop investigating, said the blood samples were contaminated, said the radiation readings were equipment malfunction, said the symbols in my photos were light artifacts. But I know what I saw, know what they were doing in that cave. It wasn't just a shelter or a lair. It was a classroom, a laboratory. They were studying us while we tried to study them. This is my official report. Every measurement, timestamp, and observation is exact. I memorized everything before my notes disappeared. I've sent copies to multiple colleagues. Some will vanish. Maybe all of them will. If you're exploring caves and find symbols that shouldn't exist, if your equipment fails and the air smells like copper and ozone, if you hear vibrations that hurt your bones, don't document, don't study. Run. Run while they're still letting you leave, because they are studying us, learning our science, our mathematics, our biology. And they're doing it right under our feet, in places we can't reach, using our own blood to write their notes. This is Dr. Isabelle Martinez. These are my findings, my warnings, my final notes on Cave System 274B. Let someone else map those tunnels. I've seen enough to know when science becomes suicide. Story 10. My name is Yuki Nakamura. I'm a professional speleologist with 15 years of experience exploring and mapping caves across Japan. What I discovered in an unmapped cave system last winter made me reconsider everything I know about what lives beneath the surface. I was conducting a preliminary survey of a new cave network in northern Hokkaido. Standard solo exploration. I'd done hundreds like it. My gear was typical for a day trip. Helmet, headlamp, backup lights, rope, basic climbing equipment, emergency beacon, first aid kit, water, and survey tools. The cave entrance was unremarkable. A narrow opening in a limestone cliff, barely wide enough to squeeze through. But something about the arrangement of bones near the entrance caught my attention. They weren't scattered randomly like normal animal remains. Someone, or something, had arranged them in precise geometric patterns. I photographed the bone arrangements and took samples. Most were deer and bear bones, but some came from larger animals I couldn't immediately identify. Deep scoring marks covered the larger bones. Not teeth marks. These were deliberate cuts, made by something sharp and heavy. The entrance passage descended steeply for about 30 meters before opening into a larger chamber. My headlamp revealed more bone arrangements on the floor. These patterns were more complex, forming concentric circles around a central point. All the bones showed the same deliberate scoring marks. The temperature dropped noticeably as I moved deeper, from 5 degrees C at the entrance to near freezing. The air felt different too. Most caves have a steady airflow, but this one seemed to pulse, like something massive was breathing far below. I reached a junction where the passage split into 3 tunnels. The left and right passages showed signs of regular use, worn smooth paths in the limestone, recent claw marks on the walls. The central passage was different. Its entrance was partially blocked by a crude barrier made of stacked bones. The barrier wasn't natural. The bones were interlocked in a complex pattern that could only be deliberate. Some pieces showed signs of modification, cut to specific lengths, notched to fit together. This was tool use, but not human tool use. The modifications were too crude, made by something with immense strength but limited fine motor control. I documented the barrier and took more photos. The claw marks on the nearby walls were fresh. Each groove was as thick as my thumb and deep enough to sink a finger into. They started at head height and continued up beyond my headlamp's beam. A sound echoed from the right passage, something heavy moving over rock. I switched off my headlamp and pressed against the wall. In the darkness, I heard controlled breathing, deep, regular breaths that sounded almost human, but not quite. The sound came from above head height, maybe 3 meters up. Heavy footsteps approached my position. Whatever it was walked upright. The rhythm was bipedal, not four-legged. The steps were deliberate, carefully placed. This wasn't an animal randomly wandering the caves. This was something that knew the terrain intimately. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it would hear it. Sweat froze on my back. The footsteps paused at the junction. Something large shifted its weight, sending small rocks skittering across the floor. The breathing sound grew closer. I reached slowly for my emergency beacon. The movement made my climbing gear clink softly. The footsteps stopped instantly. The breathing changed, shorter, faster, alert. It had heard me. A deep vocalization rumbled through the passage. Not quite a growl, not quite speech. The sound had structure, like it was trying to communicate. More vocalizations answered from the left passage. They were coordinating. I ran. My headlamp beam bounced wildly as I sprinted toward the entrance. Heavy footsteps crashed behind me, gaining ground with every stride. More creatures joined the pursuit. They called to each other, their vocalizations echoing through the tunnels. The bone arrangements blurred past as I ran. My lungs burned in the cold air. The creatures split up, some taking side passages. They knew the cave system better than me. They were herding me. I reached the steep entrance passage and scrambled upward. My boots slipped on the wet limestone. Behind me, something huge pulled itself up the slope with frightening speed. Its breathing was closer now, almost at my heels. Daylight appeared ahead. I squeezed through the narrow entrance, scraping my shoulders raw. As I burst into the open air, a massive hand shot out of the cave mouth. 5 fingers, each thicker than my wrist, grabbed at empty air where I'd been seconds before. I ran to my vehicle and drove straight to the authorities. They were skeptical until they saw my photos and the claw mark measurements. The official report calls it evidence of unknown large cave-dwelling mammals. But mammals don't arrange bones in patterns. They don't make barriers or use tools. A research team investigated the cave a week later. They found it empty, every bone arrangement gone, every barrier dismantled. But they discovered something else. The cave system was far larger than initially thought, with hundreds of interconnected passages stretching deep into the mountain. They also found the dens, huge chambers filled with evidence of long-term habitation, crude tools made from bone and stone, more complex bone arrangements, and drawings on the walls, abstract symbols carved at 3 meters height, showing signs of linguistic structure. The authorities sealed the cave entrance with concrete. They blamed safety concerns, unstable geology, but they kept the photos of those wall symbols, and they quietly started monitoring other caves in the region. Last month, another cave system was discovered 20 kilometers away. It showed the same signs, bone arrangements, tool use, symbols carved high on the walls. The creatures had simply moved to a new location. I still work as a speleologist, but never alone, and never in that part of Hokkaido. Sometimes in deep caves, I hear familiar sounds, heavy footsteps, controlled breathing, structured vocalizations. The other cave scientists hear them too, but no one talks about it openly. The official stance hasn't changed. They say Japan's caves hold no unknown large species, no creatures intelligent enough to make tools or develop primitive writing, but they've started requiring special permits for cave exploration in certain areas. The permit application includes an unusual warning. If you hear breathing in the darkness, do not respond. If you find arranged bones, do not disturb them. If you see symbols on the walls, do not photograph them. I keep copies of my photos and measurements in a secure location. The bone arrangements showed clear evolution of complexity, like something developing abstract thought. The wall symbols had consistent patterns, proto-language from a species we refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes I wonder if they let me escape that day. If the massive hand that grabbed at me could have moved faster. If they wanted witnesses to spread their story while maintaining plausible deniability. The caves are still there, stretching unknown distances beneath the mountains. And sometimes, on quiet nights, people living near cave entrances report strange sounds carrying up from the depths, heavy footsteps, deep breathing, and complex vocalizations that almost form words. End of field report. Yuki Nakamura, Japanese Speleological Society, January 10, 2024. Story 11. The GPS track log shows I walked in a perfect circle for 3 days. That's impossible in dense forest without landmarks. My name is André Dubois, and I've been hunting in the Quebec wilderness for 32 years. What stalked me last month made me sell all my hunting gear. I was on a routine 5-day hunting trip in the Laurentian Mountains. Standard loadout, Remington 700, 40 rounds, full camping gear, GPS, satellite phone, emergency beacon. Weather forecast showed clear conditions, temperature around 5 degrees. Day 1 went normally. I covered 8 kilometers, set up camp at my usual spot near a small stream. Coordinates 47 degrees 12N, 72 deg 31W, elevation 850 meters. I had good sight lines, clear firing zones, proper distance from game trails, basic security setup, motion sensors, tripwires with bells. The first sign came at 02.17, a heavy snap of branches breaking, too loud for deer, too rhythmic for a bear. The sound repeated every 30 seconds, moving in a circle around my camp. Complete circle, perfect timing. No animal moves like that. I checked my motion sensors. Nothing triggered, but the temperature had dropped 15 degrees in under an hour. My breath frosted in the air. No wind, no animal sounds. Complete silence except those footsteps. At 03 Zhao, I heard the first growl. Not wolf, not bear. The sound had multiple tones, like several creatures growling at once. It came from eye level, about 6 meters up a tree. My rifle scope showed nothing there, just those sounds coming from empty air. I broke camp at first light, headed south, following my GPS. After 4 hours of hiking, I checked my position. According to the coordinates, I hadn't moved. The GPS showed me still at my camping spot, despite covering at least 12 kilometers. The sun was directly overhead, but my watch showed 0730 all day. Every time I checked, it showed 0730. The satellite phone displayed no signal. The emergency beacon's test light stayed dark. I heard the footsteps again at noon, closer now. Same rhythm, every 30 seconds, but heavier. The impacts shook the ground. I took up a defensive position, back against a cliff face, clear view of the surroundings. My hands shook on the rifle. Something moved between the trees, too fast to track. Huge, at least 3 meters tall. It left no tracks, but branches snapped under its weight. The movement circled my position, getting closer with each pass, testing my reactions. My motion sensors started triggering randomly. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Ice formed on my gear despite the midday sun. That growling sound came again, closer, deeper, still from above. I fired a warning shot. The sound echoed wrong, kept echoing for 45 seconds, getting louder instead of fading. The thing moved again, faster this time. The trees shook as it passed. Leaves and branches fell, but I couldn't see what hit them. At 15, according to the sun, not my frozen watch, I found my first camp. Not from the night before. This was an old camp I'd used 2 years ago. The ashes were still warm. Impossible. The site had fresh prints from my boots leading away in all directions. I checked my ammo. 10 rounds missing. I hadn't fired 10 shots. The brass was on the ground at my feet, ejected from my rifle. The casings were crushed flat. Something had removed the bullets, crushed the brass, and placed them in a perfect circle around me while I walked. The footsteps got closer. Now they shook the rifle in my hands. The growling came from multiple directions. Still that impossible height. Still no visible source. The temperature hit -20 Celsius. My water froze solid. I ran, picked a direction, and sprinted. Counted my steps, kept the sun on my right. Should have been moving straight east. After an hour, I hit my own tracks. Perfect circle. Every broken branch exactly as I'd left it. Like something was herding me. Night fell at 20:30. Total darkness. No stars, no moon, despite clear skies. My flashlight worked, but the beam seemed to bend away from certain areas. Like the darkness, there was thicker, solid. Those areas moved. The thing paced around my position all night, getting closer, testing different sounds, growls, clicks, whistles. Sometimes it mimicked animal calls. Sometimes it mimicked human voices. My voice, calling for help in my own words. I tried to make a fire. The matches lit, but gave no heat. The flame touched the wood, but nothing burned. The temperature kept dropping. My breath froze into crystals that hung in the air, drifting toward those dark spaces between the trees. At midnight, it showed itself, stepped into my flashlight beam. I'm writing this clinically, factually, but there's no way to describe it that makes sense. Too tall, too many angles. Parts of it seemed to disappear and reappear as it moved. It reached out, long limbs, too many joints, fingers that bent backward. The flashlight beam distorted around it. The air crackled. My rifle turned ice cold, the metal frosting over instantly. I fired, hit its center mass with a .308 round. The impact echoed for a full minute. The creature didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, watching. The bullet fell from its body, the copper and lead somehow separated and neatly stacked. It spoke. The sound bypassed my ears, appeared directly in my head. Not words, geometric patterns, mathematical concepts. My nose started bleeding, my vision blurred. Complex equations wrote themselves in the frost on my rifle barrel. The encounter lasted 3 minutes and 42 seconds. I know because my frozen watch suddenly started working just to time it. Then the creature stepped back. The darkness bent around it. It left a perfect circle of ice crystals where it had stood. Someone found me 2 days later. I was back at my original campsite, despite walking for 72 hours straight. All my ammunition was gone, each casing neatly crushed and arranged in precise geometric patterns. My GPS showed a single track, a perfect circle 27.3 kilometers in circumference. My core temperature was 35 Celsius despite wearing full winter gear. My rifle barrel had strange marks etched into the metal, sequences of prime numbers and quantum mechanics equations. The firing pin had been surgically removed and placed in my pocket. The authorities called it hypothermia and exposure. Said I got lost and walked in circles, a common mistake in dense forest. Said the GPS malfunctioned. Said the equations were random scratches. But they couldn't explain the bullet casings, crushed by forces beyond industrial machinery. Couldn't explain the perfect circle of my tracks, impossible to maintain even with surveying equipment. Couldn't explain the equations that a ballistics expert confirmed would make my rifle 50% more accurate if applied. I'm writing this account because people need to know. Something is hunting in our forests. Something that understands physics better than we do. That can control time and temperature. that tests us, studies us, learns from each encounter. The coordinates and timestamps are exact. I memorized everything before my GPS data corrupted itself. The measurements and observations are precise. This isn't a story meant to frighten, it's a warning. If you're in the wilderness and your electronics start failing, if you hear footsteps too regular to be natural, if the darkness starts bending, don't shoot, don't run, stay still. Let it finish its observations, let it move on, because it's not hunting for food, it's hunting for information, and it already knows more about us than we know about ourselves. This is André Dubois, former hunter, now city gardener. This is my statement, my evidence, my truth. When the silence falls and your own voice calls for help, don't answer. Just wait. Just endure. Story 12. My name is Dmitry Volkov. I've been a professional hunter in the Siberian Tiger for 25 years. What stalked me through the frozen forest last winter made me question everything I thought I knew about these woods. The first sign came on day 2 of a week-long hunting trip. The temperature was 30 degrees 6, normal for January. The snow lay 2 meters deep. I'd set up my usual trap line, 10 kilometers of snares and box traps for sable and fox. I found the first trap destroyed at dawn, not triggered or sprung, destroyed. The metal bars were twisted like paper. Deep marks in the metal showed where massive fingers had gripped and wrenched. The bait and any caught prey were gone. The second trap was the same. And the third. Something had followed my trap line during the night, methodically destroying each setup. The tracks in the snow told the story. Whatever did this walked on 2 legs, leaving prints 50 centimeters long and 25 wide. The stride length between prints measured 2 meters. The creature's weight had compressed the snow almost to ground level. I estimated its mass at over 200 kilograms based on the impression depth. The tracks showed clear toe marks, 5 toes, like a human foot, but 3 times larger. I photographed the tracks and took measurements. 20 years of hunting had taught me every animal print in these woods. These belonged to no known species. The walking pattern was wrong too deliberate, too purposeful. This wasn't an animal randomly wandering. This was something following my trail with intent. I checked my satellite phone. No signal. My snowmobile had enough fuel to reach the nearest town, but darkness would fall in 6 hours. The temperature would drop to 40 degrees overnight. I needed shelter first. My cabin lay 5 kilometers north. I loaded my rifle, 7.62 cal 54R, powerful enough for bears, and started walking. The strange tracks paralleled my route, staying just inside the tree line. Whatever made them moved silently despite its size. Fresh tracks appeared ahead, crossing my path. The snow at the edges hadn't even settled yet. The creature was close, circling back to cut me off. More tracks joined the first set. There were at least 3 of them now. A branch cracked in the forest to my right. The sound came from high up, above where a bear could reach. I raised my rifle and scanned the trees. Nothing moved, but I could hear breathing. Deep, controlled breaths from multiple directions. They were coordinating, using hunting tactics I'd seen wolves employ. One group to herd the prey, others moving to cut off escape routes. But wolves don't walk upright. Wolves don't methodically destroy metal traps. I picked up my pace. The breaths grew closer. Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow behind me, not even trying to stay quiet now. They wanted me to know they were there. A low vocalization rumbled through the trees. Not quite a growl, not quite speech. The sound had structure, like the creatures were communicating. More calls answered from different directions. They were closing the circle. My hands shook on the rifle. Sweat froze inside my clothes. The creatures moved with terrifying speed through deep snow that would trap any human. They knew these woods better than me. They were pushing me toward something. I reached a clearing and stopped dead. My traps lay in the center, the metal twisted and broken. They'd gathered every trap from my line and arranged them in a deliberate pattern. A warning, a message. Movement caught my eye. A massive shape stepped out from behind a tree. It stood at least 3 meters tall, walking upright with unsettling grace. Dark fur covered its body. Its proportions were almost human, but wrong. Arms too long, shoulders too broad, head sitting low between massive trapezius muscles. I raised my rifle. The creature didn't even flinch. It knew what the weapon was. It had seen guns before. Instead, it made that sound again, that almost speech that carried meaning I couldn't grasp. More shapes emerged from the forest. 5, 6, 7 of them, all the same size, all moving with that same deliberate grace. They formed a loose circle around the clearing, just outside my rifle's effective range. My fingers found the trigger. The nearest creature tilted its head, studying my movements. The intelligence in its eyes froze me in place. This wasn't an animal reacting on instinct. This was something thinking, analyzing, planning. One of them picked up a twisted trap with massive fingers. The metal groaned as it casually bent the steel bars straight, then curved them into a new shape. It was showing me what it could do to me. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around. Another creature stood less than 10 meters away. It had moved in complete silence despite its size. Up close, I could see its face clearly. Heavy brow ridges, deep-set eyes, powerful jaw. But those eyes... I fired. The sound was shockingly loud in the winter silence. The creature didn't fall. It didn't even stumble. It looked down at its chest where the bullet had struck, then back at me. Its expression wasn't angry. It was almost disappointed. I ran. The snow dragged at my legs. Behind me, the creatures let out those calling sounds again. They didn't chase immediately. They didn't need to. They knew these woods, knew where I was going, knew there was only one place I could go. My cabin appeared ahead. I crashed through the door and slammed it shut, throwing the heavy bolt. My hands shook as I reloaded the rifle. Outside, heavy footsteps circled the cabin. They took their time, methodically testing each wall and window. The creatures stayed all night. Sometimes they scratched at the walls. Sometimes they tried the door handle. Mostly they just walked and breathed and made those almost speech sounds to each other. They knew I had nowhere else to go. Near dawn, something heavy landed on my roof. Massive fingers gripped the edge of my chimney. The whole cabin creaked as the creature peered down the flue. It breathed deeply, smelling the air, then made a sound almost like laughter. The attack never came. When the sun rose, they were gone, but they'd left messages. Every tree around my cabin bore deep claw marks at 3 meters height. My trapline was destroyed. The metal twisted into unrecognizable shapes. I managed to start my snowmobile with shaking hands. The ride back to town was a blur. I reported everything to the authorities. They were skeptical until they saw the photos, the measurements, the twisted traps. The official report calls it evidence of unknown large primates. But primates don't coordinate complex hunting strategies. They don't methodically destroy metal traps. They don't leave warnings. I still hunt, but never in that part of the taiga. Sometimes on cold nights, I hear familiar sounds, heavy footsteps in deep snow, structured vocalizations carrying over the wind. The other hunters hear them too. We don't talk about it openly. Last month, another hunter disappeared in that area. They found his cabin surrounded by massive tracks. His rifle was twisted into a spiral. The official report blames a bear attack, despite the lack of bear signs. I keep the photos and twisted traps locked away. Sometimes I take them out and study that deliberate destruction. Those weren't random acts of animal violence. Those were messages, warnings, signs of intelligence we refuse to acknowledge. The creatures are still out there, moving silently through the frozen forest. And sometimes, when the winter wind blows from that direction, I hear them. Those deep, resonant vocalizations that almost form words. They're getting closer, they're getting bolder, and they're not alone anymore. End of Hunter's Report. Dmitry Volkov, Siberian Hunters Association, January 15, 2024. Story 13. The audio analysis confirms it. The vocalizations contain complex mathematical patterns, not random noise, coherent sequences matching advanced physics equations. My name is Dr. Katya Novak. I'm a bioacoustics researcher specializing in animal communication. This is my report of what I recorded in the Carpathian Mountains. I was conducting a standard nocturnal predator vocalization study. 10 days of field recordings, solo work. Equipment: Sennheiser MKH 820 microphones, sound devices, Mix Pre-10 recorder, ultrasonic detectors, full-spectrum analyzers, plus standard camping gear and emergency supplies. Base camp location: 47 degree 23 Zen N, 25 degree 17 E, elevation 1,520 meters. Dense forest, minimal human activity, perfect conditions for recording natural wolf and bear vocalizations. The first 3 nights were routine, normal predator calls, expected movement patterns. Night 4 began differently. At 21:30, all animal sounds ceased simultaneously. Total silence, not gradual quieting. Complete instant silence across all frequencies. My equipment showed the background noise dropping to 120 dB. That's physically impossible. At 22:15, the first anomalous vocalization occurred. Frequency range 10 Hz to 98 kHz. Multiple tonal layers, some beyond known animal capabilities. The pattern repeated every 73 seconds exactly. Perfect timing, not natural variation. I triangulated the sound source using 3 microphones. The readings made no sense. The sound came from everywhere at once, or from a point that moved faster than sound itself. The spectrograph showed harmonics that shouldn't exist in nature. Temperature dropped 12 degrees in 5 minutes. Humidity sensors failed. Static electricity made my hair stand up. The vocalizations continued, changing pattern. Now they matched prime number sequences. My analysis software crashed, trying to process the complexity. At 23:45, something responded to the recordings I was making. When I played back the sounds, new vocalizations answered. Different patterns, but mathematically related. Like something was solving equations through sound. The responses got closer. The temperature kept dropping. Ice formed on my microphone diaphragms despite the weather being 15 degrees C. The static electricity increased. My backup batteries drained in seconds. My main recorder captured everything until 0017. Then the memory cards corrupted simultaneously. But the device kept recording. The meters showed input, but nothing was being saved. The vocalizations grew more complex. Started forming recognizable patterns, Fibonacci sequences, quantum wave functions, gravitational equations. Something moved in the darkness at 0030, fast, silent despite its size. My motion sensors showed nothing, but branches broke under heavy weight. The movement circled my position, getting closer with each pass. I switched to infrared recording. The camera showed heat signatures that violated physics. Cold spots that moved like living things, temperature differentials that should have caused explosive air movement but didn't make a sound. The vocalizations changed again at 0045. Now they mimicked human speech, not recordings, real-time synthesis. They spoke in multiple languages simultaneously, layered with ultrasonic and subsonic frequencies. My equipment recorded only static, but I heard the words clearly. At 01 Zur, it stepped into view. I'm documenting this objectively, clinically. The entity stood approximately 3 meters tall. Its movement violated basic physics. Parts of it seemed to move before the rest, like time worked differently around it. It vocalized directly at me. The sound contained data, Complex mathematical formulas appeared in my mind. My nose bled. My vision blurred. Numbers and equations wrote themselves in the frost that suddenly covered my equipment. The recorder's meters peaked and held. Not audio overload. The device was receiving more data than it could process. The metal casing grew hot. The digital displays showed impossible sequences of numbers. The entity moved closer. The air distorted around it. My cameras showed nothing but static, but my eyes saw too much. Geometric patterns that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Colors that had no place in the visible spectrum. It reached for my equipment. Long limbs, too many joints, movements that left traces in the air. It touched each device in sequence. Each one recorded a perfect sine wave at 432 Hertz for exactly 1 second, then died completely. Then it spoke directly to me, not through sound, through mathematics, pure information downloaded into my consciousness. My hands wrote equations automatically, covering my notebook with formulas I didn't understand. The encounter lasted 7 minutes 23 seconds. I know because that section of time repeats in my memory with perfect clarity, while the rest blurs. Then the entity stepped back. The air twisted. It left behind a perfect sphere of absolute silence, 5 meters in diameter. Search and rescue found me 30 hours later. I was still in my camp, though all my equipment was gone. My notebook remained, filled with equations that 3 physics professors later confirmed described quantum tunneling methods beyond current human theory. Core temperature 34 degrees, despite the warm night. Severe radiation burns on my hands where I'd touched the equipment. High levels of unusual isotopes in my blood. Burst eardrums despite no physical trauma. The official investigation blamed equipment malfunction and hypothermia. Said the equations were stress-induced pareidolia. Said the radiation came from faulty batteries. They ignored the isotopes that shouldn't exist in nature. But the initial recording survived, 12 seconds on a backup card. The analysis shows things that shouldn't be possible, frequencies that carry more information than physics allows. Patterns that match advanced mathematical concepts we're only beginning to understand. I'm writing this report because people need to know. Something is out there, studying us through sound, learning our languages, our mathematics, our physics, improving them, teaching us maybe, or preparing us. The coordinates and timestamps are exact. I memorized them before the data corrupted. The measurements and formulas are precise. This isn't a story meant to frighten. It's a warning, or maybe an invitation. If you're recording in remote areas and the silence becomes perfect, if you hear sounds that shouldn't exist, if your equipment starts showing impossible data, don't run, don't fight, listen, record everything you can. They're trying to communicate, but be careful what you record. Be careful what you play back, because they're learning our methods, our language, our science, and they're teaching us things we might not be ready to know. This is Dr. Katya Novak. These are my findings, my data, my truth. When the silence falls and the numbers start flowing, don't stop recording. Just make sure you're prepared for what the recordings might contain. Because the next time, they might share more than equations. The next time, we might learn what they really want to teach us. And that knowledge might change more than our understanding of sound. The equations are still in my notebook. The formulas still write themselves in my dreams. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear those patterns again. Perfect mathematical sequences floating on the edge of human hearing, waiting for someone to solve them. Story 14. My name is Antoine Dubois. I've been a park ranger in the French Pyrenees for 16 years. What I discovered during my routine patrols last autumn challenged everything I thought I knew about these mountains. The first sign appeared in early October. I found a red deer carcass wedged in a beech tree 5 meters off the ground, not dragged there by a bear or dropped by an avalanche, deliberately placed. The branches around it were broken in a pattern that suggested something had climbed up there. I photographed everything and took measurements. The carcass showed no sign of predator feeding, no tooth marks, no torn flesh, just deep impressions in the muscle tissue where something with massive fingers had gripped it. 3 days later, I found another carcass, this time a wild boar placed 6 meters up in a different tree. Same lack of feeding marks, same finger impressions. The pattern of broken branches suggested something had climbed up while carrying over 100 kilograms of dead weight. I searched the area thoroughly. The ground was too hard for tracks, but I found other signs. Branches broken at 3 meters height, bark scraped off in long strips, and most disturbing, crude structures made from woven branches, too high for a person to reach without equipment. The structures showed clear signs of tool use. Branches were stripped and shaped before being woven together. Some pieces had been modified to fit specific spots. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was deliberate construction. I set up trail cameras around the area, standard Bushnell models with night vision and motion sensors. The first night they captured nothing. The second night they were all disabled, not damaged, systematically turned off and placed face down on the ground. Whatever did this understood how cameras worked. It knew to avoid damaging expensive equipment while ensuring it wouldn't be recorded. This showed a level of intelligence that made my hands shake as I retrieved the cameras. The vocalizations started the next night. I was checking the area when I heard them, deep, resonant calls echoing through the valleys. The sounds had structure, like speech, but not quite human. More calls answered from different directions. They were communicating. I recorded the sounds on my phone. The pattern repeated every few minutes. 1 call, 3 responses, then silence. The calls moved between fixed points, like the creatures were maintaining a perimeter. My hands trembled as I checked my satellite phone. No signal. My vehicle was 2 kilometers away. The temperature had dropped to 5 degrees Celsius, and darkness was falling. The calls grew closer. Heavy footsteps crunched through the leaves behind me. The sound came from high up, like something very tall walking upright. More footsteps joined from different directions. They moved with unsettling coordination, herding me away from my exit route. I ducked behind a tree and switched off my flashlight. The footsteps paused. Deep breathing came from multiple directions. They knew exactly where I was. They were just waiting. A branch cracked overhead. I looked up slowly. A massive shape moved against the darkening sky. It climbed with fluid grace, using limbs that seemed too long for its body. The movement was almost human, but wrong. Too smooth, too controlled for something so large. More shapes moved in the canopy. They traversed between trees with practiced ease, maintaining perfect balance on branches that should have snapped under their weight. I counted at least 6 distinct figures. A low vocalization rumbled directly above me. I pressed against the tree trunk, trying to control my ragged breathing. Small bits of bark rained down as something gripped the tree higher up, much higher up. I ran. My boots slipped on wet leaves as I sprinted toward my vehicle. The creatures kept pace easily, moving through the canopy. They called to each other, coordinating their positions. Their speed through the treetops was terrifying. Something heavy landed on a branch ahead of me. The impact shook leaves loose. A massive shape dropped to the ground, blocking my path. It stood at least 3 meters tall, shoulders twice as broad as a man's. I skidded to a stop. The creature stood perfectly still, studying me. Its proportions were almost human, but distorted. Arms too long, legs too powerful, head set low between massive shoulders. Dark fur covered its body. More shapes emerged from the forest. They formed a loose circle, cutting off every escape route. Their movements showed years of practice hunting in these mountains. They knew exactly what they were doing. One of them picked up a fallen branch. Its fingers, each thicker than my wrist, stripped the bark off in a single motion. It shaped the branch into a crude club, then set it carefully against a tree. A demonstration, a warning. The first creature took a step forward. This close, I could see its face clearly. Heavy brow ridges, deep-set eyes, powerful jaw, but those eyes, they showed intelligence, analysis, planning. I stood absolutely still. Running would trigger a chase response. Fighting was pointless against something that size. My only hope was to show I wasn't a threat. The creature made that almost speech sound again. The others responded, their calls overlapping in complex patterns. They were discussing something, deciding something. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around. Another creature stood less than 5 meters away. It had moved in complete silence despite its size. Up close, the intelligence in its eyes was unmistakable. It wasn't just analyzing me, it was reading my reactions. The circle tightened, my legs shook. Sweat froze on my back despite the cold. The creatures moved with perfect coordination, years of experience evident in every motion. Then, as one, they stopped. The first creature made a different sound, shorter, sharper. The others immediately backed away, melting into the forest with impossible silence for things so large. The leader stayed, watching me. It picked up the branch it had shaped and held it out. Not threatening, offering. I reached for it with trembling hands. The wood showed clear tool marks. Deliberate modifications made by something with enormous strength but limited fine motor control. The creature waited until I took the branch. Then it made that sharp sound again and turned away. It walked upright into the forest, its gait smooth and controlled. At the tree line, it looked back once. Its eyes met mine. Then it was gone. I ran to my vehicle and drove straight to headquarters. The official report calls it an unknown large primate encounter. But primates don't coordinate complex hunting strategies. They don't disable cameras or make tools or communicate with structured vocalizations. I still work in the Pyrenees, but never in that sector. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear familiar sounds, heavy footsteps, deep breathing, those almost speech calls. Other rangers hear them too. We don't discuss it openly. Last month, another ranger found more carcasses in trees, higher this time, 8 meters up. The branches around them showed signs of tool use. Crude platforms had been constructed, using techniques that showed clear improvement over the ones I saw. They're learning, adapting, getting bolder. I keep the branch they gave me locked in my office. Sometimes I take it out and study those deliberate tool marks. They weren't random acts of animal manipulation. They were messages, signs of intelligence we refuse to acknowledge. The creatures are still out there, moving silently through the mountains, and sometimes, when the wind blows from that direction, I hear them. Those deep, resonant vocalizations that almost form words. They're getting closer, they're getting smarter, and they're watching us learn about them as much as we're watching them. End of Ranger Report. Antoine Dubois, Parc National des Pyrénées, October 30th, 2023. Story 15. The drone footage shows nothing but static, but I know what I saw that night. My name is Diego Ramirez. I've been a park guardian in Chapada dos Veadeiros National Park for 11 years. This is my report of what happened in Sector 7 last month. It started during my night patrol of the eastern boundary. Standard route, one I've done hundreds of times. Equipment, 4x4 vehicle, spotlights, thermal camera, drone, standard issue firearm. Weather conditions, clear, 22nd degree, quarter moon. At 22:30, I found the first uprooted tree. Not fallen, uprooted. A 30-meter hardwood pulled straight up and laid down with surgical precision. Root system intact, soil pattern undisturbed around it. Like it had been lifted by something impossibly strong and carefully placed. More trees appeared as I drove. 15 total, arranged in a perfect circle, 100 meters in diameter. each tree positioned exactly 20.7 meters apart. I measured. Too precise for natural falls, too careful for logging equipment. No track marks, no equipment traces. The thermal camera showed residual heat patterns in the center of the circle. Temperature differential, plus 15 degrees from ambient. The pattern was geometric, a perfect hexagon of warmth in the soil. My thermometer readings kept changing, cycling through numbers that made no sense. I launched the drone at 23:15, standard aerial survey pattern. The footage showed the tree circle clearly for exactly 45 seconds, then static, not interference, organized static. The patterns contained repeated sequences like code. The air changed at 23:30. Temperature dropped 10 degrees in 2 minutes. No wind. The forest went silent. No insects, no night birds, no animal movement. Complete silence except for a low vibration just below hearing range. I felt it in my teeth. My radio died first, then the vehicle's electrical system, then my flashlight. The drone fell from the sky, its battery somehow completely drained. Even my watch stopped. The only light came from the moon and the strange glow now emanating from the disturbed soil. The footprints appeared at midnight. They formed slowly. The ground just sank in precise patterns. 3-toed impressions, 75 centimeters long. Stride length, 2.5 meters. Whatever made them walked on 2 legs and weighed more than any known animal. I followed standard protocol, took photos, measurements, soil samples. Everything went into sealed evidence bags. I marked the GPS coordinates, though my unit only showed random numbers now. The temperature kept dropping. Movement caught my eye at 0017. Something massive shifted between the trees beyond the circle, too tall for any known species. It moved wrong, like watching something through water, parts of it seeming to arrive before others. I hit the emergency distress beacon. No response. The battery was full, but no signal transmitted. The footprints continued forming, making a spiral pattern toward the center of the tree circle. The ground temperature rose to 40 degrees despite the cold air. At 0.45, it stepped into the moonlight. I'm recording this clinically, trying to be exact. Height, approximately 4 meters. Build, bipedal but wrong. Joints bent in impossible ways, too many angles. Surface seemed to shift between solid and transparent. It moved to each uprooted tree in sequence, touched each one with long segmented fingers. Where it touched, the wood changed, crystallized, became something that looked like wood but wasn't. The atomic structure had changed. I could see it happening. The entity turned toward me at 0052. No face, but I felt it studying me. My skin prickled. Static electricity made my hair stand up. The thermal camera briefly worked again, showed nothing there despite what my eyes saw. It moved, covered 50 meters instantly. No transition, no blur, just there, then here. Up close, its surface rippled with complex patterns, mathematical sequences, molecular structures, quantum formulas. My phone's camera showed only white noise, but the image burned into my mind. The thing reached out, long limbs, too many joints, touched my equipment, each piece crystallized like the trees, changed into something that looked the same but wasn't. When I checked later, the molecular structure had been completely rearranged. It spoke. No sound, but information flooded my mind. Complex equations, scientific formulas beyond current human knowledge. My notebook filled itself with diagrams and numbers I didn't understand. My hand moved on its own, drawing quantum mechanical principles we haven't discovered yet. The encounter lasted exactly 7 minutes. I know because my watch started working just long enough to time it. Then the entity stepped back. The air twisted. It left behind a perfect circle of crystallized grass, each blade transformed into something new. Search and rescue found me at dawn. I was still standing in the circle, my notebook full of equations that 3 university professors later said described impossible physics. My equipment was there but changed. Everything crystallized into new forms that our labs still can't analyze. The trees were gone. No trace of the uprooting, no prints, no evidence. The ground temperature had returned to normal, but the soil samples in my sealed bags had changed, transformed into complex crystalline structures that defied analysis. The official investigation blamed swamp gas and stress, said the crystallized equipment was vandalized, said the equations were delusions. They ignored the molecular changes, the impossible materials, the quantum formulas that actually worked when tested. But I know what I saw. The drone's memory card, though corrupted, shows 12 frames of something that shouldn't exist. The soil samples contain isotopes that can't form naturally, and the equations in my notebook describe technologies we're only beginning to imagine. I'm writing this report because people need to know. Something is walking in our forests, something that can manipulate matter at the atomic level, that understands physics we haven't discovered yet, that's studying us, teaching us, maybe preparing us. The coordinates and timestamps are exact. I memorized everything before the evidence transformed. The measurements and observations are precise. This isn't a story to frighten people. It's a warning, or maybe an invitation. If you find trees arranged in perfect circles, if your electronics fail and the ground temperature rises, if you see something that moves like broken time, don't run, don't fight, watch, learn. They're trying to show us something. This is Diego Ramirez, Park Guardian, Sector 7. These are my findings, my evidence, my truth. When the silence falls and reality starts to crystallize, don't look away. Just be ready for your understanding of the world to change. The equations are still in my notebook. The crystallized equipment still sits in a laboratory, and sometimes on quiet nights I see those patterns again. Quantum formulas written in the bark of trees, waiting for someone to understand them. Because they'll be back. They're not done teaching us. And next time, they might show us more than just new physics. Next time, they might show us why they're here. Story 16. My name is Mei Chen. I'm a research botanist specializing in high-altitude plant species. I've spent 15 years studying vegetation patterns in the mountains of western China. What I encountered during my field research last spring made me question everything I understood about these remote areas. The first warning came through my equipment. I was monitoring environmental conditions in a study plot at 3,000 meters elevation. The audio sensors showed a sudden drop in bird calls, from normal levels to complete silence in less than 2 minutes. I checked my readings again. The data was clear. Every recording device in a 2-kilometer radius registered the same pattern. Total acoustic collapse. No bird songs, no insect sounds, no small animal movements. Just dead air. Looking up from my instruments, I noticed the physical signs. The mountain chickadees had stopped their morning calls. The musk deer in the nearby meadow had frozen in place, ears swiveling frantically. Every small mammal had vanished. The temperature was 15 degrees Celsius, normal for May at this altitude. No unusual weather patterns, no seismic activity. No natural reason for every animal to suddenly go silent. Then I found the trees. 3 ancient spruces, each over 400 years old, ripped completely out of the ground. Not blown over by wind, the root systems were intact. Something had gripped the trunks and pulled up with massive force. I photographed everything and took measurements. Each tree weighed over 2,000 kilograms. The trunk damage showed clear grip marks. Huge fingers had dug into the bark. The spacing suggested hands 3 times larger than human size. More destroyed trees appeared throughout my study area, all extracted the same way, all showing those massive finger marks. The pattern formed a spiral moving inward toward my research station. I checked my satellite phone. No signal. My vehicle was parked 5 kilometers down the mountain. The sun would set in 3 hours. Those grip marks in the bark were fresh, still oozing sap. The silence deepened. No wind, no animal sounds, just the pounding of my own heart. Even my breathing seemed too loud in that unnatural quiet. Movement caught my eye. Something massive shifted between distant trees. The motion was smooth, controlled. Whatever it was, walked upright, with unsettling grace. I ducked behind a fallen log and switched off my radio. More shapes appeared at the forest edge. They moved with coordinated precision, maintaining even spacing as they entered my study area. My hands shook as I grabbed my camera. Through the zoom lens, I caught glimpses of dark figures. Each stood at least 3 meters tall. Their proportions were almost human but wrong. Arms too long, shoulders too broad, head set low between powerful trapezius muscles. They moved directly to my research equipment. The largest one picked up a sensor array, examining it with massive fingers. It understood what it was looking at. It carefully disabled the device and set it down. More figures emerged from the forest. I counted 8 distinct shapes. They communicated through low vocalizations, not quite speech, not quite animal calls. The sounds had clear structure and patterns. One of them found my boot print in soft soil. It knelt to examine the track, fingers tracing the outline. The others gathered around, studying the print. They were tracking me. The creatures split into groups with practiced efficiency. 2 moved to high ground for better visibility. 3 spread out to sweep the area. The others began methodically checking every possible hiding spot. My breathing came in short gasps. Sweat soaked my clothes despite the cold. They searched with terrifying thoroughness, using coordinated patterns I'd seen military units employ. A branch cracked behind me. I turned slowly. A massive figure stood less than 10 meters away, perfectly still. It had approached in complete silence despite its size. This close, I could see every detail. Thick, dark fur covered its body. Muscles rippled with each breath. Its face showed a heavy brow ridge and deep-set eyes. But those eyes... The intelligence in that gaze froze me in place. This wasn't an animal operating on instinct. This was something thinking, analyzing, planning. The creature made a low sound. The others responded immediately, converging on my position. They moved with fluid grace, years of experience evident in every motion. I ran. My boots slipped on wet leaves as I sprinted downhill. The creatures pursued with terrifying speed. Their footfalls shook small rocks loose that bounced past me. They coordinated their pursuit with those structured vocalizations. Some moved to cut off my likely escape routes. Others paced me easily, herding me in a specific direction. I reached a clearing and stopped short. My research equipment lay in the center, carefully arranged in a spiral pattern. Every device was disabled in exactly the same way, systematically disconnected rather than destroyed. The creatures emerged from the forest. They formed a loose circle, cutting off all exits. The largest one stepped forward. In its massive hand, it held my field notebook. It studied the book with unsettling focus, thick fingers carefully turning pages. It stopped at my sketches of local plants, examining the drawings with clear recognition. The creature made a different vocalization, shorter, more complex. The others responded, their calls overlapping in intricate patterns. They were discussing something, deciding something. Then, as one, they backed away. The leader placed my notebook on top of my equipment. It wasn't damaged or disturbed, just relocated. A message, a warning. The creatures melted into the forest with impossible silence for things so large. The leader paused at the tree line. Its eyes met mine once more. Then it was gone. Wildlife sounds slowly returned. Birds resumed calling. Small animals emerged from hiding. The forest came back to life as if nothing had happened. I approached my equipment with shaking legs. Everything was arranged with deliberate precision. The disabled devices showed clear signs of technical understanding. They hadn't just been smashed, they'd been systematically deactivated. The official report calls it an unknown primate encounter. But primates don't coordinate complex search patterns. They don't understand electronic equipment. They don't communicate with structured language. I still conduct research, but never in that region. Sometimes during fieldwork, I hear familiar sounds, heavy footsteps, those almost speech vocalizations. Other scientists hear them too. We don't discuss it openly. Last month, another research station was found in similar condition. All equipment disabled and arranged in patterns. But they'd left something new, crude drawings scratched into tree bark showing local plant species. The renderings were accurate enough for botanical identification. They're learning, studying, documenting. I keep copies of my field notes and photos in a secure location. Sometimes I review the evidence, those systematic equipment arrangements, those deliberate patterns. They weren't random acts of destruction. They were communication attempts. The creatures are still out there, moving silently through the mountains. And sometimes, when the wind blows from that direction, I hear them. Those deep, resonant vocalizations that almost form words. They're getting closer. They're getting more curious, and they're studying us as intensively as we study them. End of field report, Dr. Mei Chen, Chinese Academy of Sciences Department of Botany, May 15, 2024. Story 17. The memory card shows only corrupted files now, but I have the GPS coordinates where I found the bear carcass. My name is Nikolai Volkov. I'm a wildlife photographer specializing in large predators in the Siberian wilderness. This is my report of what happened at those coordinates 2 weeks ago. I was tracking a large male bear through the eastern taiga. Standard equipment, Nikon D850, 3 lenses including a 600mm telephoto, satellite phone, GPS, emergency beacon. 10 automated camera traps set up along known bear routes. 2 weeks of supplies. My trained hunting dog Boris, a Siberian Leica with 8 years of bear tracking experience. The first warning came from Boris on day 3. He stopped at the edge of a clearing and refused to move forward. Hackles up, teeth bared, but no sound. Complete silence. Not fear. He chases bears regularly. This was different. His muscles trembled. He urinated involuntarily. The clearing looked wrong. Perfect circle, 30 meters in diameter. No tracks, no broken vegetation, but something had flattened every plant to exactly the same height. Like a giant cookie cutter had stamped the ground. Temperature reading -5 Celsius. Normal for October in Siberia. At the center of the clearing, I found the bear carcass. Adult male, estimated 450 kilos. No signs of decomposition. The body was still warm despite the cold air. Cause of death impossible to determine. No wounds, no trauma, no blood. Just dead, placed precisely in the center of the circle. I set up my camera equipment at 15:30. Standard documentary protocol. The light was good, cloud cover at 40%. Wind 5 mph from the northwest. Boris stayed at the edge of the clearing, still trembling, still silent. The automated cameras started failing at 16:45. One by one, they went dark. Not battery failure. The units were drained completely. Brand new lithium cells, rated for -40 Celsius, all dead simultaneously. Even the mechanical backup triggers failed. Temperature dropped 20 degrees in 5 minutes. Impossible rate of cooling. Ice crystals formed on my lenses despite the dry air. The satellite phone died. GPS showed scrambled coordinates. Boris pressed against my legs, shaking violently. At 17:15, I found the first tracks. They came from nowhere, just appeared in the middle of the clearing. Bipedal prints, 75 centimeters long, stride length over 2 meters. The impressions were deep, Whatever made them weighed several hundred kilos. But it walked on two legs. I photographed everything, took measurements, standard field documentation, but my cameras started showing errors. Digital artifacts appeared in every image. Strange patterns, geometric shapes that shouldn't be there. The memory cards corrupted as fast as I took pictures. Movement caught my attention at 17:45. Something massive shifted at the forest edge. Too big for a bear, too tall. It moved wrong, like watching a video with missing frames. Parts of it seemed to arrive before others. Boris completely shut down. Collapsed, unconscious but breathing. His body temperature dropped to 35 Celsius, despite his thick fur. I dragged him to cover behind a fallen log. The movement in the forest got closer. At 18 Nu, it emerged into the clearing. I'm writing this as precisely as possible. Height, approximately 3.5 meters. Build, humanoid but wrong. Proportions impossible, joints at wrong angles. Surface constantly shifting between solid and transparent. It approached the bare carcass, moved like stop-motion animation, here, then there, no transition, long limbs, too many joints, fingers like surgical tools, precise and metallic. It touched the dead bear with those fingers. The carcass changed. No decay, no rot. It crystallized, transformed into something that looked organic, but wasn't. The molecular structure changed visibly, like watching evolution in fast forward. My cameras recorded nothing but static. It lifted the transformed bear with one hand. No effort, no strain. Carried the 450-kilo crystallized mass to a tree, placed it exactly 6 meters up, balanced perfectly on a branch. The placement was precise, measured, deliberate. The entity turned toward me at 18:17. No face, but I felt the observation. Clinical, scientific. My skin prickled with static electricity. Every hair stood up. My mouth filled with the taste of metal. Blood ran from my nose in perfect drops that moved upward against gravity. It spoke. No sound, but information flooded my brain. Complex data, scientific formulas, biological sequences I didn't understand. My notebook filled itself with diagrams of molecular structures, genetic codes, evolutionary patterns beyond current science. The encounter lasted 12 minutes exactly. I know because my dead watch started working, just to time it. Then the entity stepped back. The air twisted. It left behind perfectly organized piles of crystallized organic matter, leaves, branches, soil samples, all transformed into teaching materials. I lost consciousness at 18:29. Search and rescue found me 24 hours later. Both Boris and I had severe hypothermia, despite being properly equipped for the conditions. The bear carcass was gone. The cameras were fried. Every memory card corrupted except one. That last card contained a single image. The authorities said it showed nothing but digital artifacts, but 3 biology professors later confirmed the patterns matched advanced genetic sequences we're only beginning to discover. Evolution we haven't witnessed yet. The official investigation blamed equipment malfunction and hibernation behavior. Said the bear probably climbed the tree itself. Said the crystallized samples were mineral deposits. They ignored the impossible temperatures, the molecular changes, the scientific data that proved true. But I know what I saw. The one surviving photograph shows something that shouldn't exist. The transformed samples contain genetic codes that can't form naturally, and the diagrams in my notebook describe biological principles we're just starting to understand. I'm writing this report because people need to know. Something is studying our wildlife, something that can manipulate organic matter at the molecular level. That understands evolution we haven't discovered yet. That's teaching us, preparing us, maybe warning us. The coordinates are exact. I memorized them before my GPS scrambled. The measurements and observations are precise. This isn't a story to frighten. It's a record of contact, of education, of change. If you find perfect clearings in the forest, if your electronics die and the temperature drops, if you see something studying our animals with impossible precision, don't run, don't hide, watch, learn. They're trying to show us something. This is Nikolai Volkov. These are my findings, my evidence, my truth. When the silence falls and biology starts to transform, don't look away. Just be ready to understand life differently. Boris still won't hunt bears. He follows different tracks now, tracks that appear and vanish impossibly, and sometimes in perfect clearings we find more crystallized samples, more lessons, more evidence that something is guiding our understanding of life itself. The transformations continue, the teaching continues, and next time they might show us more than just new biology. Next time they might show us why they're changing things. Story 18. My name is Hassan Amari. I've been a mountain guide in Morocco's Atlas Mountains for 18 years. What tracked my group through the peaks last summer made me question everything I knew about these ancient ranges. The first sign appeared on day 2 of a 5-day trek. I was leading a group of 4 experienced German hikers through the remote valleys near Jebel Toubkal. We found unusual tracks crossing our path, prints too large for any known local species. I took measurements and photos. Each print was 45 centimeters long and 20 wide. The stride length between them measured over 1.5 meters. Whatever made them walked on 2 legs, leaving clear impressions of 5 toes. The tracks showed deliberate movement patterns. They didn't wander randomly like animal trails. They followed strategic paths, high ground, natural choke points, positions with good visibility. These were hunting tracks. More prints appeared each day, always maintaining the same distance from our group. They paralleled our route, staying just out of sight. The creatures were tracking us, studying our patterns. By the 3rd day, my clients noticed. The tracks grew bolder, cutting across our path more frequently. They always appeared fresh, the edges sharp in the rocky soil. Whatever made them stayed close, just beyond where we could see. I checked my satellite phone. No signal in these valleys. The nearest village was 2 days' walk. The temperature hit 35 degrees during the day, dropping to 5 degrees at night. We had supplies for 5 days. The sounds started at sunset. Deep, resonant vocalizations echoed between the peaks. Not quite speech, not quite animal calls. The sounds had structure, like complex signals. More voices answered from different directions. They were coordinating, maintaining a perimeter around our position. The calls moved in regular patterns, tracking our every movement. That night, something circled our camp. Heavy footsteps crunched on loose rock. The steps came from above head height, like something very tall walking upright. More creatures joined the first, their movements showing practiced coordination. My hands shook as I checked our perimeter. The creatures kept perfect spacing just outside our lamplight. Dark shapes moved against the stars, bigger than any human. One of the Germans raised his camera. The flash revealed a massive figure at the edge of our camp, over 3 meters tall, broad shoulders, long arms. The photo showed only a blur of motion. It had moved the instant the flash fired. The creatures grew bolder as the night progressed. They took turns approaching the light's edge, letting us catch glimpses. Massive limbs, dark fur, faces that seemed almost human but wrong, brow ridges too heavy, jaws too powerful. Their movements showed intelligence. They maintained perfect coordination without visible signals. Each one knew its role in their hunting pattern. Dawn revealed fresh tracks completely circling our camp. The prints formed precise geometric patterns, not random placement, but deliberate designs. They were sending a message. We broke camp quickly and changed course toward the nearest village. The creatures followed, matching our pace easily. Their tracks showed they could move much faster. They were choosing to stay with us. The fourth day, they started taking our equipment. Items vanished from the edges of camp, not torn or damaged, carefully removed. They understood zippers, clasps, and buckles. We found the stolen gear arranged in patterns on high rocks. Everything was systematically sorted, electronics in one pile, metal tools in another, fabrics in a third. They were studying our technology. The Germans wanted to turn back. I knew that would be worse. The creatures had been herding us, gradually pushing us toward something. Running would trigger their chase response. That night, they came closer than ever. Dark shapes moved just beyond our fire's reach. Deep breathing came from multiple directions. They were waiting for something. A branch cracked overhead. I looked up slowly. A massive figure balanced on a rock outcrop, studying our camp. Its movements were fluid, showing years of experience in this terrain. More shapes emerged from the darkness. They formed a loose circle, cutting off all escape routes. Their coordination was perfect. Each one knew exactly where to stand. The largest one stepped forward. This close, I could see its face clearly. The intelligence in its eyes made my hands shake. It wasn't just watching us, it was reading our reactions. It made a complex series of vocalizations. The others responded in overlapping patterns. They were discussing something, planning something. Then, as one, they melted away into the darkness. Their footsteps faded in different directions, but I knew they hadn't left. They were setting up the next phase of their hunt. We didn't sleep. The sounds continued all night. Heavy footsteps, deep breathing, those structured calls. They maintained their perimeter until dawn. The fifth day, we found what they'd been pushing us toward. A narrow valley opened into a broader space. Ancient stone structures dotted the slopes, things that didn't appear on any map. The structures showed signs of recent use, fresh breaks in the stone, new arrangements of rocks, and drawings, crude but recognizable images scratched into the walls at 3 meters height. The creatures had been herding us here, showing us this, proving they weren't just animals. We took photos quickly and left. The tracks followed us all the way back to civilization, always the same distance, always watching. The official report calls it an unknown large primate encounter. But primates don't coordinate complex hunting strategies. They don't study human technology. They don't create art or architecture. I still guide in the Atlas Mountains, but never in that region. Sometimes on quiet nights, I hear those familiar sounds, heavy footsteps, structured vocalizations. Other guides hear them too. We don't discuss it openly. Last month, another group found more structures. The new ones showed improved construction techniques. The wall drawings were more complex, showing clear progression in skill. They're learning, evolving, getting bolder. I keep copies of our photos and measurements secure. Sometimes I review them, those deliberate track patterns, those sorted equipment piles. They weren't random animal behaviors. They were attempts at communication. The creatures are still out there, moving silently through the peaks. And sometimes, when the wind blows from that direction, I hear them. Those deep, resonant calls that almost form words. They're getting closer. They're getting more organized, and they're watching us learn about them as much as we're watching them. End of guide report. Hassan Amari, Atlas Mountain Guides Association, August 15th, 2023. Story 19. The video from my helmet camera shows only static now, but the claw marks in my climbing gear are real. My name is Aisha Patel, and I've been a mountain guide in the Himalayas for 15 years. What happened on our last expedition changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I was leading a group of 6 experienced climbers up a new route on the north face. Standard equipment, full climbing gear, satellite communications, emergency beacons, medical supplies. Weather forecast showed clear conditions, temperature -15 Celsius, wind speed 20 mph. The first warning came from the wildlife. At 4,200 meters, all signs of life disappeared. No birds, no snow leopard tracks, no small mammals, just empty snow and rock. We've seen animals at 6,000 meters before. This wasn't normal. Base camp setup went smoothly at 4,800 meters. 6 tents, proper spacing, all safety protocols followed. The first night passed quietly. Too quietly. Even the wind seemed muffled, like something was absorbing the sound. Day 2, we found the caves. 3 perfectly circular openings in the rock face, each exactly 2.5 meters in diameter. Not natural formations. The edges were smooth, almost polished. No ice despite the surrounding glacier. The rock felt warm to touch. The thermal scanner showed impossible readings. The cave interiors measured +20 Celsius, despite the freezing external temperature. No heat source visible, no geological explanation for the warmth. The air coming from inside smelled like ozone and copper. At 15:30, the electronics started failing. First the satellite phone, then the GPS units. Even our watches stopped. The temperature dropped another 20 degrees in 10 minutes. Ice formed on our gear despite the bone-dry air. I ordered a closer inspection of the caves. Standard safety protocol, 3-person teams, safety lines, constant radio contact. The radio worked for exactly 45 seconds, then nothing but static with strange patterns, not random noise, organized like code. The first team entered the leftmost cave at 16:15. James Chen, Kelly Martinez and I marked our line every 10 meters. The tunnel descended at a perfect 15-degree angle. Walls smoothed like glass. No tool marks, no natural formation patterns. We found the marks at 50 meters in, claw marks in solid rock, deep grooves, longer than my arm, spaced exactly 27 centimeters apart. Whatever made them was huge, and the marks were fresh, no erosion, no weathering. The temperature kept rising as we descended, +25 Celsius at 100 meters depth. The tunnel opened into a chamber. Perfectly spherical, 30 meters in diameter, more claw marks, more geometric patterns, and something else. In the center stood a pillar of black stone. Not stone, some material I couldn't identify. Perfectly smooth, covered in symbols that seemed to move when you didn't look directly at them. The air around it rippled like heat waves. Our headlamps started failing at 16:45. Not batteries, the light seemed to bend around certain areas of the chamber. Like the darkness was solid there. Those dark spots moved, shifted, watched. The second team radioed from the middle cave. Their voices came through distorted, stretched. They reported identical conditions. Same spherical chamber, same black pillar, same moving darkness. Then their radio went dead. At 17 we heard the first sound. A deep vibration that made my teeth hurt. Regular pulses, like a heartbeat but wrong. Too slow, too powerful. It came from the pillars, all 3 pillars, pulsing in sequence. The temperature spiked to +40 Celsius. Our gear started to melt, plastic deformed, metal softened, but the black pillars stayed ice cold. I touched one. The surface felt like liquid and solid at the same time. My fingers went numb. Movement caught my eye at 17:15. Something massive shifted in the darkness. Not human, not animal. The proportions were wrong. It moved like broken time. Here, then there. No transition. My helmet camera recorded only static. It emerged into our lamplight. I'm recording this as precisely as I can. Height, at least 4 meters. Build, impossible to describe. Angles that shouldn't exist. Joints that moved backward. Limbs that separated and rejoined. The surface rippled like oil, but felt like metal. The thing reached the pillar. Long fingers, too many joints. Touched the black surface. The symbols rearranged themselves, started showing complex equations, mathematical sequences, atomic structures, DNA patterns we've never seen. My notebook filled itself. Numbers, formulas, diagrams I didn't understand. My hand moved on its own, drawing quantum mechanics and genetic codes and evolutionary patterns that shouldn't exist. The entity watched, studied, taught. At 1730, it spoke. No sound, pure information downloaded into our brains. Scientific concepts, technological blueprints, biological sequences beyond current human knowledge. My head pounded. Blood ran from my nose in perfect geometric patterns. The encounter lasted exactly 15 minutes. I know because my dead watch started just to time it. Then the entity stepped back. The air twisted. The darkness solidified. When our lights worked again, the chamber was empty. All three teams experienced the same thing, same entity, same information download, same geometric blood patterns. We compared notes on the surface. Every notebook contained identical equations, identical impossible science. We abandoned the expedition at dawn. During our descent, the caves vanished. The rock face showed no openings, no evidence they ever existed. But our gear still showed the damage. Our notebooks still contained the equations. Our cameras still showed nothing but patterned static. The official investigation blamed altitude sickness and hallucination. Said the equations were coincidence. Said the damage to our gear came from normal wear. They ignored the matching notebooks, the impossible materials, the scientific principles that actually worked when tested. But we all know what we saw, what we learned. The notebooks contained formulas for new energy sources, genetic modifications, space travel principles we're only beginning to imagine. 3 different universities confirmed the science was real and far beyond current human knowledge. I'm writing this report because people need to know. Something is using our mountains as teaching sites. Something that understands science we haven't discovered yet. That can manipulate matter and energy and time itself. That's trying to show us what's possible. The coordinates are exact. I memorized them before our GPS units died. The measurements and observations are precise. This isn't a story to frighten. It's a record of contact, of education, of change. This is Aisha Patel. These are my findings, my evidence, my truth. The equations are real. The science works. And they're still out there, still teaching, still preparing us for something we might not be ready to understand. The caves appeared again last week. Different location, same design, same pillars, same entity, same lessons. They're not finished teaching us, and maybe next time they'll show us why they chose our mountains as their classroom. Story 20. My name is Olga Petrova. I've been a wildlife researcher in the Ural Mountains for 20 years. What I discovered during my field study last autumn challenged everything I understood about what lives in these remote ranges. I was documenting animal behavior patterns near Mount Narodnya when I found the first structure. A complex arrangement of branches woven between 3 trees, suspended 2 meters above ground. Not a natural formation. The branches were deliberately cut, shaped, and assembled. I photographed everything and took measurements. The structure showed clear signs of tool use. Branch ends were stripped clean, some even sharpened. The weaving pattern was complex, using multiple layers for strength. More structures appeared as I followed the ridgeline, each one larger and more sophisticated than the last. They formed a pattern, leading deeper into an unexplored valley. The construction methods showed improvement over distance. Early structures were crude, simple branch arrangements. Later ones showed complex joinery, with pieces modified to fit specific spots. I documented each site meticulously. The largest structure measured 6 meters across, utilizing over 50 shaped branches. The engineering was impressive. Load-bearing supports, crossed bracing, even primitive platforms. My hands trembled as I took samples. 20 years of research had taught me every local species' capabilities. No known animal could create these. The tool marks showed enormous strength, combined with deliberate precision. The temperature dropped to 0 degrees C as darkness approached. My research station was 3 kilometers back. The satellite phone showed no signal between these peaks. Something moved in my peripheral vision. A dark shape, much larger than human size, stepped behind a tree. The movement was smooth, controlled. Whatever it was, walked upright with unsettling grace. I clicked off my headlamp and pressed against a rock face. More shapes appeared at the valley's edge. They moved with coordinated precision, maintaining even spacing as they entered the area. Through my camera's zoom lens, I caught glimpses of massive figures. Each stood at least 3 meters tall. Their proportions were almost human but wrong, arms too long, shoulders too broad, heads set low between powerful muscles. They moved directly to the newest structure. The largest one began adjusting the branches, massive fingers working with surprising delicacy. It understood engineering. It was improving the design. More figures emerged from the forest. I counted 12 distinct shapes. They communicated through low vocalizations, not quite speech, not quite animal calls. The sounds had clear patterns and structure. One of them found my boot print in the snow. It knelt to examine the track, fingers tracing the outline. The others gathered around, studying the impression. They were tracking me. The creatures split into groups with practiced efficiency. 4 moved to high ground for better visibility. 6 spread out to sweep the area. The others began methodically checking every possible hiding spot. My breathing came in short gasps. Sweat froze on my back despite the cold. They searched with terrifying thoroughness, using coordinated patterns I'd seen military units employ. A branch cracked behind me. I turned slowly. A massive figure stood less than 5 meters away, perfectly still. It had approached in complete silence despite its size. This close, I could see every detail. Thick, dark fur covered its body. Muscles rippled with each breath. Its face showed a heavy brow ridge and deep-set eyes. But those eyes... The intelligence in that gaze froze me in place. This wasn't an animal operating on instinct. This was something thinking, analyzing, planning. The creature made a low sound. The others responded immediately, converging on my position. They moved with fluid grace, years of experience evident in every motion. I ran. My boots slipped on icy rocks as I sprinted downhill. The creatures pursued with terrifying speed. Their footfalls shook loose stones that bounced past me. They coordinated their pursuit with those structured vocalizations. Some moved to cut off my likely escape routes. Others paced me easily, herding me in a specific direction. I reached a clearing and stopped short. My research equipment lay in the center, carefully arranged in a geometric pattern. Every device was disabled in exactly the same way, systematically disconnected rather than destroyed. The creatures emerged from the forest. They formed a loose circle, cutting off all exits. The largest one stepped forward. In its massive hand, it held one of my trail cameras. It studied the camera with unsettling focus, thick fingers carefully examining each component. It understood what the device was for. It was showing me it knew it was being watched. The creature made a different vocalization, shorter, more complex. The others responded, their calls overlapping in intricate patterns. They were discussing something, deciding something. Then, as one, they backed away. The leader placed my camera on top of the equipment pile. It wasn't damaged, just relocated. A message. A warning. They melted into the forest with impossible silence for things so large. The leader paused at the tree line. Its eyes met mine once more. Then it was gone. I approached my equipment with shaking legs. Everything was arranged with deliberate precision. The disabled devices showed clear signs of technical understanding. They hadn't just been smashed. They'd been systematically deactivated. When I checked the camera's memory card later, I found something impossible. They'd recorded themselves. Brief, blurry clips of their construction work. They wanted me to see. The official report calls it an unknown primate encounter. But primates don't build complex structures. They don't understand electronic equipment. They don't communicate with structured language. I still conduct research, but never in that valley. Sometimes during fieldwork, I hear familiar sounds, heavy footsteps, those almost speech vocalizations. Other scientists hear them too. We don't discuss it openly. Last month, another research team found more structures. The new ones showed remarkable advancement, multiple levels, weather protection, even primitive tools stored inside. They're learning, evolving, building. I keep copies of my photos and measurements secure. Sometimes I review the evidence, those systematic constructions, those deliberate patterns. They weren't random animal behaviors. They were demonstrations. The creatures are still out there, moving silently through the mountains. And sometimes, when the wind blows from that direction, I hear them. Those deep, resonant vocalizations that almost form words. They're getting closer, they're getting more sophisticated, and they're studying our reactions to their revelations. End of research report. Dr. Olga Petrova, Russian Academy of Sciences Department of Wildlife Biology, October 30th, 2023. Story 21. The sonar readings make no sense. They show something that couldn't exist at those depths. My name is Dr. Mateo Rodriguez. I'm a marine biologist studying predator behavior in deep freshwater lakes. This is my record of what we encountered during our research last month. I was conducting a standard population study of lake trout in Lake Superior. Location, 47°59 N, 87°33 W, depth 405 meters. Equipment, research vessel with full sonar array, underwater cameras, water sampling gear, ROV submersible. 3-person team, 2 weeks of supplies. The first anomaly appeared on day 3. The sonar showed a mass moving at 300 meters depth. Size estimate, 12 meters long, 3 meters wide. Too big for any known freshwater species. The movement pattern was wrong, too precise, too geometric. It traced perfect circles in the deep water. Water temperature at that depth should have been 4 degrees C. Our sensors showed 15 degrees C in a perfect sphere around the object. No thermal gradient, no mixing, like something was maintaining a bubble of warm water in the cold deep. At 14:30, all the fish disappeared. The sonar showed complete evacuation of a 2-kilometer radius. No gradual movement, everything just vanished. Even the plankton readings dropped to 0. The water went dead. The underwater cameras caught the first clear movement at 15:45. Something massive passed below our ROV at 200 meters. The video shows only static, but the ROV's pressure sensors recorded displacement equivalent to something weighing at least 2,000 kilos. The water chemistry changed at 16Y. Oxygen levels spiked. New compounds appeared in our samples, materials we couldn't identify. The mass spectrometer showed molecular structures that shouldn't exist in nature. Our sample containers started melting. I launched the ROV for a closer look. Standard diving protocol, continuous surface contact. At 100 meters, the video feed started showing patterns, not interference, organized sequences of lights and shadows, like something was trying to communicate through our equipment. The ROV's external temperature hit 25 degrees C at 150 meters. The pressure housing started creaking. The video showed massive shapes moving in the darkness, bioluminescence in colors that shouldn't exist, patterns that hurt to look at. At 200 meters, we lost control of the ROV. It moved on its own, following precise patterns, perfect circles, geometric spirals. The navigation data showed impossible speeds. The video feed alternated between static and those strange communicative patterns. Something huge appeared at 16:45. The sonar showed it clearly. Length, 15 meters. Mass, approximately 5,000 kilos. Shape, vaguely humanoid but wrong. Too many appendages, too many joints. It moved like nothing I've ever seen in 20 years of marine research. The creature approached the ROV. Long limbs, fluid movements impossible for that depth. No signs of pressure damage, no signs of normal biological limitations. It touched the ROV with appendages that seemed to phase through the metal housing. The ROV's cameras captured everything for 3 minutes before failing. The footage shows something that defies biology. A body that shifted between solid and transparent. Organs that glowed with impossible colors. A face, if you could call it that, with features that rearranged themselves constantly. At 17 qua, it spoke. Not through sound, through the ROV's data feed. Complex information packets, scientific formulas, biological sequences beyond our current understanding. The ship's computers filled with data faster than their storage could handle. The water around the ship started moving strangely. Perfect vortexes formed, each exactly 10 meters in diameter. The temperature rose to 30 degrees in precise circles. Fish appeared in the warm zones, species that shouldn't exist. Living evolutionary steps we've never seen. The creature released the ROV at 17:15. The machine returned to the surface on its own. The metal was changed, transformed at the molecular level into something our instruments couldn't identify. The cameras now recorded spectrums beyond normal light. We collected samples of the transformed water. Each contained new organic compounds, new DNA sequences, new life forms, microscopically small but impossibly complex. The mass spectrometer results showed atomic structures that violated known physics. At 17:30, everything went silent. The sonar died. The water turned mirror smooth in a perfect circle around our ship. Then we saw its surface, just for a moment. Just long enough to see those impossible limbs, those shifting colors, that face that wasn't a face. It raised an appendage toward our ship. The air filled with information. Data streamed directly into our minds. Evolutionary paths, genetic codes, biological systems that couldn't exist yet somehow did. My notebook filled itself with drawings of molecular structures I didn't understand. The encounter lasted exactly 12 minutes. I know because every clock on the ship synchronized to mark the time. Then the creature sank. The water returned to normal temperature. The strange fish vanished. But the changes in our samples remained. The official investigation blamed equipment malfunction, said the samples were contaminated, said the video showed only artifacts. They ignored the new species we discovered, the impossible compounds, the evolutionary data that rewrote biological textbooks. But I know what we saw. The ROV footage, though mostly static, shows brief glimpses of something that shouldn't exist. The water samples contain life forms that evolved along paths we're only beginning to understand. The data in our computers describes biology beyond current science. I'm writing this report because people need to know. Something is studying our waters, something that can manipulate life at the molecular level. That understands evolution we haven't discovered yet. That's showing us what's possible in our own oceans. The coordinates are exact. I memorized them before our navigation systems failed. The measurements and observations are precise. This isn't a story to frighten. It's a record of contact, of discovery, of change. 3 universities have confirmed the authenticity of our samples. The new species are real. The evolutionary patterns work. The biological systems function. Whatever we encountered wasn't just studying us, it was teaching us. This is Dr. Mateo Rodriguez. These are my findings, my evidence, my truth. When the water goes dead and the temperature rises in perfect circles, don't run. Watch. Learn. They're showing us what lives in our deepest waters. The transforms continue. New species appear where we encountered it. New patterns emerge in our data. And maybe next time, they'll show us more than just new biology. Maybe next time, they'll show us why they're changing our understanding of life itself. Story 22. My name is Lars Nilsson. I've been a wildlife photographer in northern Norway for 16 years, specializing in remote Arctic environments. What systematically destroyed my camera equipment last winter made me question everything I thought I knew about these mountains. The first camera disappeared 3 days into my month-long assignment. A high-end trail camera, secured to a tree with heavy-duty straps. It wasn't torn off or damaged. The straps were carefully unbuckled, the memory card removed, and the device placed face down on the ground. I checked my other cameras. 2 more had been disabled the same way. Whatever did this understood how the equipment worked. It knew about memory cards, about camera angles, about detection zones. The next night, I lost 5 more cameras, each one systematically deactivated. The straps were unbuckled with deliberate precision. The batteries were removed and placed separately. The memory cards were gone. I set up new cameras with reinforced security, heavy steel cables, locked protective cases, motion sensors with overlapping fields. Nothing small enough to be a known animal could disable them without triggering multiple alarms. The temperature dropped to 25 degrees C. The winter darkness lasted 20 hours. My cabin sat alone in the valley, surrounded by cameras and motion sensors. I watched the monitors and waited. At 2 a.m., the first alarm triggered. On the screen, a massive shape moved between trees. The figure walked upright, its movements smooth and controlled. It approached a camera with deliberate purpose. My hands shook as I adjusted the monitor settings. The infrared feed showed a creature at least 3 meters tall. Long arms, broad shoulders. It moved with unsettling grace for something so large. The creature examined the camera carefully. Its fingers, each thicker than my wrist, traced the steel cable. It understood the security. It was studying the upgrade. More shapes appeared on other monitors. They moved with coordinated precision, maintaining even spacing as they approached different cameras. They were working together. I counted 8 distinct figures. They communicated through low vocalizations, deep, resonant sounds with clear structure. Not animal calls, not quite speech, something in between. One of them found the cable anchor point. Its massive hands gripped the steel. With a single smooth motion, it pulled the entire assembly out of the frozen ground. No strain, no effort, just enormous strength applied with precision. The others followed suit, methodically disabling each camera. They didn't damage the equipment. They carefully disassembled each setup, laying out the components in organized patterns. My hands trembled as I checked the satellite phone. No signal. The nearest town was 30 kilometers away. Outside, heavy footsteps crunched in the snow. They were coming to the cabin. The first impact shook my door. Not an attack, a knock. 3 precise strikes that rattled the frame. They knew exactly how doors worked. I pressed against the far wall, breath frozen in my lungs. Through the window, massive shapes moved in the moonlight. They formed a loose circle around my cabin, maintaining perfect spacing. The largest one stepped into view. This close, I could see every detail. Dark fur, powerful muscles, a face that straddled the line between human and animal. But those eyes, the intelligence in that gaze made my hands shake. It wasn't just looking at me. It was reading me, analyzing me, understanding me. It held up one of my cameras. Its fingers worked the controls with surprising delicacy. It powered on the device, adjusted settings, then turned it toward me. It was learning, copying. More creatures approached, each carrying disabled cameras. They arranged the equipment in a precise circle around my cabin. Every lens pointed inward. They were sending a message. The leader made a complex series of vocalizations. The others responded in overlapping patterns. They were discussing something, planning something. Then, as one, they melted into the darkness. Their footsteps faded in different directions, but they left the cameras, all facing my cabin, all ready to record. I didn't sleep. The sounds continued all night, heavy footsteps circling in the snow, deep breathing from the darkness, those structured calls passing back and forth. Dawn revealed their full message. Every camera had been reassembled. Every lens was clean and aligned. Every memory card was returned, except they'd been wiped clean. The snow showed their tracks clearly. Each print was 50 centimeters long, with 5 distinct toes. The stride length between them measured 2 meters. They'd maintained perfect spacing all night, forming concentric circles around my cabin. I packed my equipment with shaking hands. As I loaded my vehicle, movement caught my eye. Dark shapes watched from the tree line. They stood upright, perfectly still, observing. One raised its arm in what looked almost like a wave. The others followed suit. Then they turned and walked into the forest, their movements fluid and coordinated. I drove straight to the authorities. The official report calls it equipment tampering by unknown large primates. But primates don't understand complex electronics. They don't coordinate systematic surveillance. They don't send deliberate messages. I still work as a wildlife photographer, but never in that valley. Sometimes, during assignments, I hear familiar sounds, heavy footsteps, those almost speech vocalizations. Other photographers hear them too. We don't discuss it openly. Last month, another photographer's equipment was found arranged in similar patterns, but the creatures had left something new, crude attempts at photography, blurry images captured on stolen cameras, showing their own kind in posed positions. They're learning, experimenting, creating. I keep copies of my records secure, the equipment arrangements, the track patterns, the systematic disassembly notes. They weren't random acts of destruction. They were attempts at communication. The creatures are still out there, moving silently through the mountains. And sometimes, when the wind blows from that direction, I hear them. Those deep, resonant calls that almost form words. They're getting closer. They're getting more curious. And they're documenting us as much as we're documenting them. End of field report. Lars Nilsson, Norwegian Wildlife Photography Association, February 15th, 2024.